All right, welcome back. I will first look to the court reporter. Are you ready for us to go back on the record?
I am, thank you.
Great, thank you very much. I will go ahead and orient us. It is the afternoon of September 30th. I am Nicole Kinsey, the presiding hearing officer for the Administrative Hearings Office of the State Water Resources Control Board. And this is the afternoon portion of the hearing today with respect to the proposed Sites Reservoir project. Where we left off before lunch was with the of our first panel of witnesses by the protestants, or some of the protestants, I should say. And we heard from all four of the witnesses on the panel. So I think I'll look to my team, we can go ahead and pin our witnesses, and I will turn to Sites Project Authority. I see you, Mr. Ferguson. Do you have questions for these witnesses?
I do.
And with that, we will, once we get everyone pinned here, that may take a moment, then I will turn things over to you. And thank you for your patience. I think our usual person tasked with pinning is out at the moment, so we aren't as quick on the draw here. We should have, let's see, I'm speaking to my team, Ms. Norris, Mr. Marston, Mr. Mulcahy, and Vice Chair Tayama.
Hello, yes.
Are we missing some of the witnesses? I don't see everyone, I think, on the participant list.
This is Sherry Norris. You can't see me because I used Zoom to get a hold of you, but I am driving. So I didn't want, you don't need to see like my chins, but I'm here.
While you are driving, are you available to answer questions?
Yes, I am.
All right. But we can't pin you, so we'll see how that goes. Let's see. We have the vice chair, thank you. And then we're also looking for Mr. Marston and Mr. Mulcahy. I see Mr. Mulcahy. There we are. It looks like Ms. Willie, I don't know if you have any information. I don't see Mr. Marston on the Zoom platform. Maybe what we can do is I can turn to you, Mr. Ferguson. Would it be all right with you if we started without Mr. Marston? Do you need him on this panel for us to get started here? And you are on mute.
Sorry.
There we go.
I do not need him to get started.
All right, well, let's go ahead. And thank you to all of you who are here. Let's go ahead and get started. I'll hand things over to you, Mr. Ferguson.
Good afternoon. My name is Aaron Ferguson. I'm here on behalf of the Sites Project Authority. We're counsel for the authority, and I'm going to be asking questions to all four witnesses once we get Mr. Marston. And so I would like to start with you, Ms. Norris. Can you hear me? I cannot see you, so.
Ms. Norris, we can't hear you very well, and it's not going to work for the court reporter. Are you still,
Yeah, I'm still traveling.
how long do you estimate you'll be traveling?
I don't know.
I will pull over and then see if I can do better for you.
Thank you.
One moment. I apologize. I can hear you fine. I apologize that you can't hear me.
I
don't know if
think
that
we're
helps
okay
at
right
all.
now if you're in a good location.
Yes, I am. Can you guys hear me
Somewhere
okay,
safe.
Mr.
Yeah.
Ferguson? Okay,
Go ahead,
then we're
Mr.
good.
Ferguson.
Okay, great. Okay, Ms. Norris, I'm going to be reviewing passages from your testimony and then asking you questions. So for everybody else that's on the video, I'd like to bring up Friends of the River 2, please. And then turn to page 3. So Ms. Norris, on page 3 of your testimony at lines 7 through 9, you say that laws like ISDEAA and other federal laws support tribal self-determination and resource management, and that
Yes.
projects like the site's reservoir will undermine these efforts by threatening tribal continuity. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
And what do you mean by tribal continuity?
If the tribes themselves as entities that need to protect the welfare of their constituency, if they can't do so, then it disables them from completing one of the main requirements of to take care of their membership. Does that help?
And in your opinion, how would the site's reservoir project threaten tribal continuity?
The tribes are not able to provide or support the subsistence and cultural uses of their members because the reservoir were to release warm waters or increase the methylization of mercury or harmful algal blooms or other add to other toxins in the system, then the tribes will be their rights are impaired, and the right for the nation, the tribal nation, to support that won't exist.
So which tribes do you believe will be impaired in the ways you just described?
All of the tribes in the source and receiving waters. So you have salmon that need to move and other anadromous fish that need to move throughout the watershed. They will need to make sure that there's cold water and that the watershed is not toxic. And so all of those tribes, in addition to those who have cultural resources specifically within the valley, and those resources would be then underwater.
Okay, on the first point about salmon and mercury, have you provided any evidence demonstrating that the tribes you mentioned would be impacted in those ways?
Yes, I included information about that and resources that talk about how how watersheds that are impacted that are underwater are adding the decaying plant matter allows for methylization to increase, and therefore it makes the toxin of mercury specifically to move into the aquatic biosphere and then become bioaccumulated through all of the species in those watersheds. And then for salmon specifically, salmon are impacted by warm water, and if they are not able to live out their life cycle then the fish aren't there to be ingested or to be part of the cultural uses that tribes have for salmon, which includes prayer and the salmon are just important to the tribe in extremely various ways. It's like one of the main species that the tribes in the entirety of the watershed are looking to for health. One of the key species.
But I I just want to make sure I'm understanding this. I do not see any specific evidence in your testimony linking the issues you're talking about to any specific tribes. So
it's all of the tribes in the watershed that rely on salmon. All of them that rely on salmon.
so you're suggesting that sites will have certain impacts on the salmon population. Is that correct?
It's salmon and many other species, but it's basically that the release of water from reservoirs when it's released. There's first of all the fact that the reservoir itself will pull from the watershed itself and store that instead of have the water move through the watershed, or one. And then two, when the water is released, that water will have higher levels of or that there will be higher levels of mercury in the entirety of the watershed every time that we do something like create a dam. The information I referred to in my testimony talked about the fate and transport of mercury, and it also talks about how one of the main things that happens in reservoirs is that you have an increase of decaying plant matter, which then mixes with toxins and enables those toxins to be more readily available, which means that the methylization of mercury happens more, is increased. Whereas mercury might be in the system and not be available in the fish, when there's methylization that occurs, it now is moving into the food chain, which bioaccumulates in the fish. And it's not just in the reservoir. When that water is released, there's more mercury in that released water, and the water's warmer, which increases the process, which adds to the process.
Okay, a little bit later I will get to specific questions about the authority's mercury analysis, and we can look through some of those results.
Okay.
But let me just ask, did you do any sort of independent analysis of the mercury concentrations in the water that CITES is going to release into the Sacramento River?
Well, it hasn't taken place yet because you haven't built the dam yet, but what I included in there has to do with the information that's provided. I cited sources, right? So as far as independent studies, I didn't go out and do sampling. What I have is information on the fate and transport of mercury and information about what happens in dams during dam creation, and then how that water, when it's released, can impair a system. And so all of those are included in resources and citations in my testimony.
And are you an aquatic toxicologist?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
That's why I included the sources of those that are.
Okay. So moving on to page 4, Friends of the River 2, please. Can we scroll down? Great, that's good. So at lines 8 through 10, Ms. Norris, you state that tribal water rights in California, shaped by the concept of Indian reserved water rights, encompassed both consumptive and non-consumptive uses, such as fishing and maintaining in-stream flows to support fishery resources, correct?
Correct.
So by the phrase Indian reserved rights, are you referring to those rights that arose with creation of Indian reservations by the federal government?
Federal reserved rights and all encompassing. So it include what you just mentioned as well.
Okay. Are you aware that the scope of Indian reserved rights are governed by the purpose of the reservation?
That's not entirely true. And those are Indian reserve rights have not been completely adjudicated. So,
But there is law that speaks to the scope of Indian reserved rights, correct? Whether they've been adjudicated or not.
well, of course there are laws to it, but whether or not it is it's only finite to that. It also has to do with the right of usage of the watershed and the fish and the species. So we're talking about fish that travel throughout the watershed, and their life cycle isn't bound to one physical location.
But I'm talking about the scope of the phrase you used, Indian reserved rights. And I'm just asking whether you're aware that the Indian reserved rights are governed by the purpose of the reservation. The
It's
scope of the
initiated
rights.
with that.
What else is relevant?
What else is relevant is other case
In your
law that
opinion?
expounds it into into use of watersheds and also traditional use territories.
But any of those uses that may be found in relationship to those other areas need to be tied back to the purpose of the reservation, correct?
I think I want to object here. You're asking about legal conclusions.
Well, she's offered a number of legal opinions, or partial legal opinions in her testimony on Indian reserve rights and otherwise. So I'm just trying to understand the basis for her statements.
I think the question is fair as long as we're sticking to Ms. Norris's understanding of what these terms she's used in her own testimony mean. So with that caveat, although you need to ask, oh, you seem to know the question. Go ahead, Ms. Norris.
It is like as I answered, it may have originated there, but it has been expounded since then. And I did include citations for those, for how it has changed over time.
Okay. So do you agree that non-consumptive uses need to have supported a purpose of the reservation that existed at the time of the reservation's formation?
No, I believe that is the basis of the beginning of the case law for federal Indian rights and for federal Indian law and for water rights, but it's not bound solely by that. No.
So which cases are you referring to that found a non-consumptive use that was unrelated to the purpose of the reservation when it was established?
I don't have that in front of me. I apologize. We can either come back to it another time. It's because I am traveling. I apologize. But I can give you information later as to other case law. I apologize for not having it in front of me at this moment.
I think I'll move on. I've seen the cases you've cited in your testimony, so I'll move on. On page 4 here at lines 10 and 11, you state that tribes in California have federally reserved water rights and Indian reserved water rights. So you appear to distinguish Indian reserved rights from federally reserved rights, correct?
I apologize. I don't know that. I'm sorry, I'm looking kind of. What line are you on? I can see it, but.
On 10 and 11, you state that tribes in California have federally reserved water rights and Indian reserved water rights. And I'm asking you whether you're distinguishing those two types of rights.
There are federally reserved water rights, Indian water rights. I actually, honestly, I believe that there is some water rights that are reserved, that are part of Native American laws that are not just in federal, but there's other statutes in tribal constitutions of their own. So I can provide information afterwards on that.
But
I'm not sure
if the basis is in Indian constitutions, then they're not reserved rights, correct?
I can't answer that question.
Okay.
Excuse me, if I may, there's a bit of overlap in the back and forth. It's hard
Okay.
to get the record.
All right, I will slow down. All right. I'd like to scroll down a bit, please, on page 4, Ms. Norris, to lines 16 and 17. So, Ms. Norris, on lines 16 and 17, you state that allowing a reservoir to have water before tribes in California violates the principles of water rights and prioritization as established under California law, correct?
Correct.
So you seem to suggest that the State Water Board's approval of a permit for the sites project would allow the sites project to have water before tribes, correct?
Correct.
What is your basis for suggesting that approval of a permit for the project would allow the sites project to have water before tribes?
The tribal water rights haven't been properly evaluated as in relates to sites water reservoir, and I'm looking at the first and right, or first in time, first and right laws, the underpinnings of water rights law.
But even if those reserved rights haven't been adjudicated, assuming they are prior in time, then they wouldn't be put behind the sites project, correct?
That sounds like your assumption. I didn't say that. Or can you repeat the
Well,
question?
yeah,
I'm not
so
clear on what you're asking.
a federally reserved tribal right, its priority date will not be affected by the approval of a permit for the sites project, correct?
That's not what I said.
Well, I'm
talking
asking you a
about the choice.
question.
I'm talking about in my testimony, I'm talking about the choice to approve a water right for sites reservoir before properly considering the rights of tribes. That's what I was discussing.
Well, your sentence here mentions that it would violate the principle of water rights and
Yes, it would violate the
I'm
principle
sorry,
of
Ms.
first
Norris,
in time.
Ms. Norris and Mr.
Sorry?
Ferguson, we do have to talk one at a time. In
Oh,
part for the
I'm
full
sorry.
reporter and in part for me. So Mr. Ferguson gets to ask his full question and then you get to provide your full response.
That's
So
fine.
let's try again. Mr. Ferguson, will you start us again?
Sure. So in lines 16 and 17, Ms. Norris, you're speaking to what you call a violation of the principles of water rights and prioritization, correct?
Correct.
And so I'm asking you, will tribal reserved rights, to the extent they exist, have their priority dates affected by the approval of a site's water right permit?
The site's water right permit is being looked at a time when tribal and prior to tribal water rights being properly evaluated. So not correct. Your assertion is incorrect. Your question doesn't make sense to me.
Well, let's take a hypothetical. If a tribe has what's determined to be a 1920 priority date based on the principle of federally reserved rights, and the sites project water right is permitted with a 1977 priority date, does that approval of the sites permit affect the priority date of the tribal right? Even if it hasn't been adjudicated?
That's not the statement that I meant or that I said. What I was talking about is that approving a water right, it is in for sites reservoir that would limit the ability for tribes to utilize that water according to what their culture and subsistence needs are. To do that, is in violation of first and right and first in time and the considerations that need to be made in order to identify if new water rights are infringing on the older first in time rights. That's what my statement was meant to state. So your question does not appear to be, I don't understand the appropriateness of your question.
So Ms. Norris, just to clarify, Mr. Ferguson does get to ask questions outside of the scope of your testimony if he would like. That is part of
Okay,
this.
well, that particular question to me, it does not respond to what I was writing in there. And I like that if I would not like to get into that. That's
Well,
not the scope of what I included in my paper.
If you don't understand the question or you don't have an answer to the question, you can certainly say that. But Mr. Ferguson may ask questions that extend beyond the scope of your testimony written here. So to the extent you have an answer to Mr. Ferguson's question.
I don't have an answer then. No,
Okay.
I do not have an answer.
That's fine. Thank you.
Yeah.
Can we scroll down to page 5, please? At lines 2 through 4. So Ms. Norris, on page 5 at lines 2 through 4, you suggest that the site's reservoir is in direct violation of California's own constitution because it is unreasonable to provide rights to a new reservoir over the people who have been in the state since time immemorial, correct?
Correct.
Is this statement supported by any legal authority you're aware of?
This is what I was referring to earlier in the first and right, first in time.
So your opinion is that the prior appropriation doctrine supports this statement?
Yes.
Are you being offered as a legal expert by Friends of the River in this proceeding?
By Friends of the River as a legal expert, I'm citing other case law that is relevant, and I am not a lawyer.
Okay, thank you.
That's why I include citations.
So on page 5 at lines 4 through 8, continuing on in this paragraph, you refer to prioritization of a reservoir's water needs over those of tribes, correct?
That is what yes. I should answer just yes or no. Yes.
Which tribal needs are you referring to?
The right to subsistence foods, the right to cultural resources, and the right to have access to cultural heritage sites that are beneath the reservoir itself that will be built.
All right, which tribes are you referring to that would be impacted in the ways that you just mentioned?
Sacramento River tribes, and the tribes in the Bay Delta, which is part of the Sacramento River watershed, through to the San Francisco Bay.
And have you offered any evidence in this proceeding to support those statements regarding impacts?
I have, and my colleagues have already. We've been discussing the toxicity, the removal of water from the system, water coming back into the system, being warmed and having toxins be, exacerbated. All of these things affect the life cycle and health of fish, and fish are a subsistence food for tribes.
All right, can you please name one tribe that would be impacted by not having access to salmon?
My colleagues on the panel have already attested to their own connectivity to salmon. And the tribes on the watershed, you start at the top and you work your way down. All of the Sacramento tribes are salmon tribes. I already mentioned Round Valley earlier, who have Round Valley Indian Tribes with an S, encompasses multiple tribes that were moved from their homelands into the valley they are in now. And of those tribes, Nome Lackey is in one of those that are specifically connected to the site, the reservoir location itself. There are others, but I think that it's most of the tribes in the Sacramento River that have attested over the years. And all the years I've given presentations on mercury in fish and trainings on how to avoid mercury in the human body, the tribes that participated over and over again were Sacramento River Valley tribes. Those are the ones that attested to their use of the salmon and their concern over the safety and health and abundance of salmon.
But in this proceeding, we're concerned about whether the sites project would impact that access to salmon, correct?
Yes, because the watershed itself is impacted by projects that warm or add toxins to a watershed or remove water from inflows, in-stream flows.
Okay, can you name for me a tribe other than Round Valley that would lose access to salmon as a result of the sites project?
If the sites project is providing warm water to the system and the system needs cool water in order for salmon to populate, the tribes that I would mention are everyone from the Winnemem-Wintu all the way through to Muecmoloni in the ocean and all the tribes in between.
Okay, well, we'll get to the temperature data in a minute. So, scrolling down on page 5 here at starting at line 21 and then continuing through to line 2 on page 6. You suggest that Sites Reservoir has not properly assessed the impact on the salmon population, and that this is detrimental to tribal nations and other populations dependent on salmon for sustainability, whether culturally or financially, correct?
Correct.
In what way or ways do you believe Sites has not properly assessed the impact on the salmon population?
Sites Reservoir does not go into details and does not include information on tribal beneficial uses. And it doesn't include information that doesn't show that salmon will be able to be viable and be healthful. It doesn't talk about how the water will be more cool coming out of Sites Reservoir or will be as cool as the water that goes into it. Does that answer your question? Maybe I didn't get to it well enough. I apologize. Maybe restate.
Have you reviewed the EIR
I have.
section regarding aquatic biological resources?
Yes, I have.
And are you a biologist?
No, I'm citing sources of other biologists.
And so you don't believe that the aquatic biological resources section of the EIR discusses potential impacts on salmon?
It's not complete because the information for of tribal uses is not in the document and has not been properly evaluated. The impacts to salmon and the reciprocal relationship between salmon and tribes is not in the document.
Well, ultimately, the viability of the salmon population is what's most important for the tribal purposes, correct?
It's not the entirety of what's important. It's not just the viability of the salmon, it's the placement throughout the watershed. Because that those salmon are able to live their natural life cycle and to not be augmented or in particular to not be what's the word I want to use? To not be dependent on fisheries where salmon are being reintroduced. They have to be able to live their natural life cycle in order for it to be connected completely to tribal cultures.
I'd like to go to page 6 at lines 6 through 9. So Ms. Norris, at lines 6 through 9 on page 6, you suggest that issues such as water flow diversions and rising temperatures are critical concerns that will affect the survival and health of salmon, and that these are inadequately addressed in the environmental analysis for the site's proposal, correct?
Correct.
In what ways do you believe water diversions and temperatures have been inadequately analyzed by the site's authority?
They've been downplayed, they've been discarded, and they haven't included the consultation, the information that you received from tribes in consultation entirely.
And what information is that?
Excuse me?
What information is that you're referring to?
You need to speak with tribes in consultation in order to receive that information, or at least include all of the tribes from the watershed.
But
So
you're
not just
offering
those
the,
in the site's reservoir area, you need to speak with the tribes in the source and receiving waters. That would
You
enable
just-
you to have a complete picture of the project.
so you just offered the opinion, though, that consultation has been inadequate, correct?
It's not just my opinion, it's the tribes that I've spoken to, and also in asking the agency, agencies can provide a list of which tribes they have consulted with, and it does not include tribes in the source and receiving waters adequately.
And that's your opinion.
That's what I've heard and what I've seen, and also what's available on the website for which tribes have been consulted with.
Well, I'm going to move to strike that testimony as hearsay. Her conversations with tribes about impacts and are hearsay. And she's,
Do you have a list? Do you have a list of tribes you've consulted with?
Ms.
I'm
Norris,
asking a question.
I'm sorry, maybe I shouldn't ask. I should say, I would ask you to refer to your own list of which tribes have been consulted with and identify whether or not it's all of the tribes in the source and receiving waters of the watershed. And I know that from seeing that list, the answer is no. It is not all of the tribes from the watershed. Therefore, all of the tribes tribes in the watershed have not participated in consultation.
thank you, Ms. Norris. Mr. Ferguson, let me address the hearsay objection, which is, I think, as you know, hearsay is admissible in these types of proceedings. The objection is noted, however, because there are limitations in reliance on hearsay. If you would please, I think what we're going to do in this proceeding is I will ask for hearsay objections in writing in bulk, so we have them and we can easily identify them. If you would note it in a future submittal, then we will have that written down, but noted for the record here.
Okay, I will do that. All right, can we move down to paragraph 15 on page 6? Ms. Norris, in paragraph 15, you suggest that the site's reservoir will exacerbate challenges facing the salmon population, which will further continue affecting tribal communities whose cultural subsistence is dependent on having access to their traditional foods, correct?
Correct.
Have you conducted any specific analyses indicating tribal communities would no longer have access to salmon or any of their other traditional foods?
Well, as has been discussed in previous testimony, in particular, those that spoke about the health and wellness of salmon in the watershed, some were today and then the days prior. If the salmon collapses, there's no salmon for food, and therefore there can't be subsistence fishing or eating of traditional foods in the region. Most tribes that in the region are eating repressed rates of salmon because the salmon has been closed. We have there are 2 years where we've not been able to access salmon. And that right there speaks to the closure of salmon, the ability to fish for salmon speaks to it in itself.
So I need to ask the question again. Have you conducted any specific analyses indicating tribal communities would no longer have access to salmon or any other traditional foods due to the sites project? Or have you relied solely on what you've heard from other?
It's not what I've
people?
heard from others. It's the evidence that I included in my testimony that I cited, and the actual fact that the salmon industry, that runs of salmon have been closed for 2 years by Fish and Wildlife. It is closed. So we've had 2 years of salmon closure, which disables tribes from eating salmon. So I don't have to do research because the evidence is right there in the salmon closure itself.
But the sites project isn't currently in operation, correct?
Correct. The
Okay.
sites project would exacerbate an already existing problem at the same time that we are trying to work on creating more habitat for salmon. The sites reservoir is doing the opposite by warming and pulling water out of the watershed.
Well, on the point of warming, on page 8 of your testimony, at lines 7 through 8, you state that the scientific evidence clearly shows that reservoirs lead to warmer water, correct?
Correct. And then I cited
Yep.
two peer-reviewed scientific articles that discuss how that happens.
Have you reviewed the authority's water temperature analysis for its discharges from the reservoir to the Sacramento River?
Yes.
All right, I'd like to bring up AHO 73, please.
Let's see if I can see that. There it is.
And turn to page 670. Page 70, excuse me. And table 612D, which I think is at the bottom of this page. Yeah, so Ms. Norris, I would like to ask you some questions about table 612D, which appears here on page 670, and then continues on page 671. So you just indicated you reviewed the authority's water temperature analysis, correct?
Yes, but I have to admit to you that this table, without seeing the rest of it at this moment, I can't. Trying to look at it, I apologize. It's hard on this screen. And it keeps, every time I open it, my screen goes black. So I can't see what you're looking at. And that is a technology moment. I apologize. I'm not going to be able to reference it. I'm going to keep trying. But at this point, every time I open it, my screen goes black.
Mr. Ferguson, are you going to be able to answer,
Yeah.
I mean, not answer, ask your questions, or do we need to reorganize this?
Yeah, I think that's going to be challenging.
obstacle. Yeah.
I apologize. I wish
Yeah.
I could see it and I just can't, but I could get back to you at another time. If you want to ask
Well-
this question when I can
Well-
properly view it.
Let me give that some consideration. I can move on to the next question, but we may still want to ask those questions. So can we move to page, please go back to Ms. Norris's testimony at page 9. And lines 10 through 13, please. So in these lines, Ms. Norris, you state that it is imperative that salmon and steelhead remain in the system at sufficient levels to support tribal subsistence fishing.
Correct.
Water quality objectives, correct?
Correct.
And are you aware of any water body from which the site's authority proposes to divert that has been designated with the tribal beneficial use?
I'm actually referring in my testimony to the Oswego, and in which case it's all waters of the state that don't currently have a TMDL.
I'm sorry, Ms. Norris, can you say that? You said that in your testimony earlier too. Can you say that more slowly? What word are you saying?
It's the Oswego, the inland surface water, the mercury water quality objective.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, let me just ask it more generally then, and unrelated to this specific sentence. Are you aware of any water body from which the site's project authority proposes to divert that has been designated with the tribal beneficial use?
Tribal beneficial uses have been adopted under the Oswego for all water bodies that don't have a TMDL. So that means that it's a state water quality objective that's scattered throughout the state, including some waters in the Sacramento River Valley. So if you're asking for the specific ones that do not have a TMDL, I'm going to have to refer back, either answer you at another time when I have that in front of me, or ask that we refer back to, I think the water board staff have that information already. And I apologize that I can't give that to you right this moment.
Are you familiar with the process by which the state and the regional boards assign beneficial uses or designate beneficial uses for water
Yes, I am.
bodies?
It's through the basin plan amendments.
And so it's your opinion that there are water bodies in the Sacramento Valley that have tribal beneficial use designations?
They're currently being, that was part of my testimony, that tribes have asked for them and have been working on them since 2010. And there are other processes and projects, such as the site's Reservoir project, that are being elevated to be completed before the TBU designations can be complete. There are water bodies, specifically in the Klamath River, where TBUs have been applied and designated. But the frustration is exactly this. The tribes have been asking for it, on the processes to move to designate water bodies with tribal beneficial uses has been long. And it doesn't need to have taken as long as it has. And I think it comes down to, in part, political will and the ability for us to put staff time and into moving tribes through this process.
So
but the water quality objectives that I
there's-
refer to are in the Oswego, and those definitions were adopted into the mercury water quality objective specifically.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. We have way too much overlapping speaking. I'm losing chunks of this.
I apologize.
This is the reporter.
Do you want me to repeat what I just said?
Sure, I think there was a question in there I missed as well, but I don't know what I missed.
I think we'll start again with Mr. Ferguson. I think Ms. Norris, you were finishing your answer, but Mr. Ferguson, if you would start again with, I think you had a next question that you were ready to ask.
Yes.
Please.
So, Ms. Norris, I'd like to confirm that there are currently no water bodies in the Sacramento Valley designated with tribal beneficial uses. Is that correct?
There is I think that your question is not connected to my testimony. I don't know how to what's the rules for this moment. I could use some
legal Ms.
support in this, because
stated the rules and
yeah,
related to your testimony.
Okay.
But the rule, but my information in my document had to do with water quality, and all of that had to do with the water quality objectives in the Oswego. The Oswego itself points to tribal beneficial use definitions that have been adopted in the state everywhere where there's not a TMDL. So it lives in that document for the purposes of mercury as a water quality objective. So if you're asking, it appears to me that what you're asking me is the relevance of my use of the need for salmon in order to meet that water quality objective. That exists. But as far as
Norris,
for
Ms.
other
Norris,
toxins have tribal beneficial uses been applied in a
Norris,
basin plan, the answer
please.
is no.
Please, Ms. Norris, let's stick to the questions here. I realize there may be some difficulty in understanding what Mr. Ferguson's questions are, but regardless of the basis for his questions, you are here to answer them. So if you would please, if you don't know the answer, you can say, I don't know. That's fine. Or I don't understand
know.
the question.
I don't know then.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Excuse me, this is the reporter. I cannot competently report this at this point. It's becoming unreportable. So either you have to do a much better job of speaking one at a time, or I have to log off and find somebody else who can report this.
I think part of the problem is we're speaking over each other. It's also, I realize when a speaker is speaking on Zoom, it's hard to hear someone else, that someone else is also trying to talk. But I will ask Ms. Norris and Mr. Ferguson to just be mindful of trying to take a deep breath before we speak. That may be helpful and helpful for the court reporter. I understand that frustration. Let's just slow it down a notch, and I think that will help us quite a bit. So let's give that a shot. And please, to our court reporter, I appreciate you, and please let us know if we still have this problem. And with that, I think I will turn back to you, Mr. Ferguson.
Ms. Norris, I would like to ask you one more time to confirm that there are no water bodies in the Sacramento Valley that are designated with tribal beneficial uses. Is that correct?
I can't answer that question because, well, no, I can't answer that question. There's I would need to confer with the water board on the Oswego and how it applies for me for the water quality objectives to confirm whether that is entirely the case. They're not, the answer, I guess, is no, it is not in a basin plan. But I need to qualify that and say that the water quality objective in the Oswego does apply to bodies of water within the Sacramento River watershed.
And are you suggesting that that's a water quality objective tied to a tribal beneficial use?
Correct.
And which tribal beneficial use is that?
Subsistence and cultural uses defined in the Oswego. And and of them, subsistence has a water quality objective that allows for fish to be healthy enough to eat 4.5 meals per week as a water quality objective.
And so which water bodies in the Sacramento Valley do you believe that applies to?
Those that do not have TMDLs.
She's already answered that question. She can provide a detailed list later if that's what you really want to get to.
Well, I think that what's all right. Well, we can move on, Mr. Ferguson.
Yep. So on this same page, Ms. Norris, you state that the construction and operation of the site's reservoir would violate the rights of California Indian tribes, correct?
Correct.
So which rights do you believe would be violated by
The
construction
ability to eat food, to eat subsistence foods without toxins. The ability for the
Norris,
fish
the court reporter's not going to like me, but I wasn't done.
Yes.
Sorry.
So, Norris,
Can you repeat that?
Wait.
I couldn't hear you.
Let's wait for the question, take a deep breath, then answer it. It will seem
Yeah, I couldn't hear the question.
slow.
I apologize. That's what I'm saying is it was too quiet.
Okay. Mr. Ferguson, back to you.
So which rights do you believe would be violated by construction and operation of the site's reservoir?
The subsistence fish, the ability to eat subsistence fish or to eat fish without having toxins in them. The ability for the other beneficial uses that are in the watershed of having that are related to cold and spawn and having those fish exist in the watershed because they will be impaired, and cultural uses that are related to salmon and other fish in the watershed.
Why do you characterize those as rights?
Why do I characterize this as that
I'm
we've
not
that
object. You're asking her to make a legal conclusion, I think.
I'm going to overrule it because Ms. Norris included in her testimony. I think so. As I'm following Mr. Ferguson, he is asking about line 15, where Ms. Norris testifies that construction and operation of the site's reservoir violate the rights of California Indian tribes. And as I understand, he's exploring what Ms. Norris means by that. So to the extent, I guess we'll caveat it that it's not that she's stated she's not an attorney, but I would like to understand what Ms. Norris means by that statement.
I apologize. I don't mean to be repetitious, but I thought that I just did. So it was that the ability for tribes to eat subsistence foods to practice culture. So there's inherent rights that tribes have to do that. And there's federal precedent for tribes to be able to do that. And then there's California law that is meant to support tribes being able to do that.
So can we move on to page 10 at lines 4 through 5? Great, thank you. Ms. Norris, on lines 4 through 5, you state that the site's reservoir will disrupt salmon habitats, which are crucial and infringe on the tribe's rights to these important resources. What is your basis for stating that the reservoir will disrupt salmon habitats?
If water that moves out of reservoirs is warmer than the water that moved into the reservoir, then that disrupts the ability for fish to rear and survive and then remove back into the system for spawning. It's related to say a habitat of fish.
Well, I'm asking a question specific to site's reservoir.
Yes, so sites as reservoirs is a reservoir. Reservoirs create a warming of the water that's stored, and when it's released, that water is warmer than the water that went into it. And also that there's an increase in toxicity that comes from the fact that the water was in that reservoir, which exacerbates methylation, harmful algal blooms, etc. And so when that water is released, that water is unhealthy for the fish in the ecosystem.
So you said you'd previously reviewed the site's authority's temperature analysis, correct?
Yeah, and unfortunately, I can't see that chart. So if you want to bring me back a different day, I apologize. I can't see it at this moment.
So you're aware that the discharge temperatures are predicted to be at a level that would only change the Sacramento River by less than a degree, and oftentimes would cool it just slightly by less than a degree, correct?
No, I'm sorry, I can't answer that at this time.
Okay, so you didn't.
I can't see it, and I don't have that information in front of me. I apologize.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so in your review of the site's authority's temperature analysis, you didn't learn the information that I just mentioned. Is that accurate?
I don't have that information in front of me. I can't answer to that at this moment. I apologize.
So honestly, I had a series of questions about mercury and methylation, but it was going to require us to review testimony and the EIR. And, I guess we can't do that today. So this is pretty frustrating that this is the day,
I
and
apologize. I thought we were going on at
these
9
witnesses,
10.
and yet they can't. completely
I can come back
participate.
at another time. I apologize. I thought that we were going to go on at 9 or 10, and it turned out to be much later. And I am a mother, and I do have to pick up my child, so I had to drive.
So Ms. Norris, are you available later this afternoon? When are you available?
Not today, but any other day I would be.
So on October 2nd, that's Wednesday, you would be available to be in front of a computer?
I have to look at my calendar. I know that there's something on that date that I might not be able to get out of, but if I can make myself available, I will. I'm just looking at it right now. I apologize.
And I'm looking also to, I don't know, Ms. Willie, if this is you. I realize you're not the attorney for Friends of the River, but how can we coordinate this better so we don't have this? I'm looking for some help here to get this. I would like to hear from Ms. Norris. I don't want to have to strike her testimony because we didn't have a chance for cross-examination, but we need to have a time when she can be
Right.
asked a question.
Mhm.
I'm
Ms.
looking at
Kinsey,
it
this is
right now.
Eric. Sorry, this is Eric Busher.
I'm
So I
sorry.
understand the problem with Ms. Norris's testimony, and appreciate her willingness to try to be flexible. We also have designated and disclosed reports from experts who are going to go right in detail on the methylation of mercury and the water quality impacts. Right, so that's not just Ms. Morris's testimony that she is using or relying on. And I understand that Mr. Ferguson wants to question the witnesses who are opining about those water quality impacts. But if we're getting into really technical details about, how the methylation of mercury works from the reservoir, right, there's other witnesses that are already designated to testify on those subjects as well.
Well, I would just offer, if that's the case, then there should be no harm in striking all her testimony.
I included,
Hold
I'm
on.
available on the
Ms. Norris, hold
2nd
on a second. Oh, thank you.
until
Okay.
3 o'clock.
I don't know who's,
And also,
Can we-
I did include sources for all of my information regarding mercury and the methylation process.
Yeah, and respectfully, that's Mr. Ferguson's suggestion is not at all what I am suggesting.
Right. No, I get you. I get
The Ms. Norris is testifying and has done so, and has expressed her willingness to do so on Wednesday as well if she needs to look at other documents on these subjects. But it's not like Ms. Norris is the only witness with information about water quality impacts, temperature impacts, methylation of mercury, et cetera.
I appreciate that, Mr. Busher, and I understand that. I think it's fair for Mr. Ferguson to ask questions of Ms. Norris with respect to the testimony, well, and to some extent explore the basis for the testimony that she's provided here. And we do need a time when Ms. Norris can respond to documents that Mr. Ferguson may want to ask her questions about. What I'd like to do, I see your hand, Mr. Mooney, so maybe I'll hear from you, Mr. Mooney, and then I'd like to go back to Ms. Norris. Let's be careful about talking over each other because I didn't hear what Ms. Norris had to say about being available on Wednesday, and I would like to turn to that. But Mr. Mooney, I think you're first.
I was just going to suggest maybe we just take a couple minutes and give Ms. Norris time to check her calendar, and then see if Wednesday works based upon what we've already said and what's already been said. And if it works and she comes, we can just designate that Wednesday morning she would be available.
A break seems like a fine idea, so we can all look at our calendars. Mr. Marston, did you have something you wanted to add now?
Well, I didn't want to interrupt the exchange between Mr. Ferguson and Ms. Norris, but Mr. Ferguson asked a number of questions, which I have the answers to. For example, he asked, what rights would be impacted by the diversion of Sacramento water into the proposed dam and reservoir sites. Well, the as you know, under Indian federally reserved water rights.
Well, Mr. Marston, let's hold for a minute. Mr. Ferguson will certainly have the chance to pose these questions to you, and he has a right to pose them first to Ms. Norris if you'd like to specifically. But I understand and I appreciate you're also here on the panel and available to Mr. Ferguson. I think Mr. Mooney had an excellent suggestion that we all take a break. Let's take 10 minutes. We might as well make it a real break. Let's take 10 minutes.
Oh, before you do that, if I may, can you just explain to me what the rules are? I thought if a question was asked of the panel and one of the panel members didn't have the answer, another panel member could propose the answer if they knew it. Is that
But-
not?
That is part of it, but Mr. Ferguson also can ask the question of a specific panel member as well.
All right.
To explore that particular witness's understanding.
I have a number of answers to a number of his questions that Ms. Norris was not able to answer.
Excellent. Well then, Mr. Ferguson, you now are aware of that, and I'm sure that's coming. Let's take a break. We'll come back at 2:19, and then Ms. Norris, I will turn to you and we will talk about when we can have you in a more convenient situation. I also am a mother, so I understand this. It's the reason for our hard stop at 5 p.m. every day. But I appreciate that, and we will talk about when we can have you in front of a computer. So with that, I will see all of you at 2:19. All right, it is 2:19. I will look back to our court reporter. Are you, hopefully the break was helpful. Are you ready to go back on the record?
Before we go back on the record, I really do need to stress the importance of everybody speaking one at a time. There are gaps in the record where all I have is simultaneous crosstalk because that's all I can make out. So just, I don't want to continue like that, but I'm trying to butt in and I can't really get in, and I don't think anybody's hearing me.
Well, that's exactly and I think I will ask, we have been able to manage to make it work so far, but I will ask for everyone to take a pause before you speak. And then make sure the other is finished speaking and then go forward. And we will try to be patient with one another as we go through this.
Thank you.
Thank you. I really
Kinsey.
appreciate your work. Yes, Mr. Ferguson.
I'd like to make a suggestion before we get started here. I have about 4 more questions that are not related to the 2 topics I wanted to bring up the documents for, that I think I could ask right now. And then I'm fine with not returning to these sets of questions that I had intended to ask Ms. Norris. And I'd ask these 4 questions today and we just move on.
All right. That circumvents any further challenges. So with that, I think that sounds fine. Do we have Ms. Norris?
No, I think she had to drop off at this time, but she is available Wednesday until 2 p.m. 10 to 2 p.m. ideal, but she can be made available then. And then you can finish asking all of the questions that you had prepared.
Okay, we'll be ready to do that.
Thank
And
you.
then a quick administrative thing. Mr. Marston has to break between 3 and 3:30. So just wanted to let you know that for your scheduling.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I also will say, to the extent possible, if you can let me know in advance, that's quite helpful to all these witnesses and future witnesses. We're working through a lot of schedules here, and I realize everyone has other things that they're doing, and I fully appreciate that. But to make this work in an efficient way, it is helpful to know in advance so that we can try to coordinate all of these moving parts. We have 30 plus people on the line. I don't know how many on YouTube, and we're all here to hear from the witnesses. So, Mr. Mooney.
I just wanted to clarify that then the witness is coming back, but any motion to strike has been withdrawn. Is that correct?
I don't think there was sorry, I'm sorry, Mr. Ferguson. I don't think there was a motion to strike, but you're going to clarify for me, Mr. Ferguson.
Well, we'd like to reserve all objections that we might have to her testimony.
I think that's fair. Does that clarify, Mr. Mooney?
That's fine. But well, I guess what the earlier when the witness was, Mr. Ferguson had indicated the witness may not be, thought the witness may not, or said he didn't need the witness any further. I didn't want to see a motion to strike on basis that he didn't get to ask those questions. So that was my initial reason for raising the hand. But if the witness is going to be present, then that may be moot at this point.
Yep.
Let me jump in on, and I'll say, it sounds like the witness is coming back, and I understand, Mr. Ferguson, that you're willing to finish asking your questions at that time on Wednesday. It sounds like Wednesday before 2. And then at that point, we can address any other objections or motions with respect to that availability of Ms. Norris. Does that make sense, Mr. Ferguson?
Yes.
And then, Mr. Mooney, did I, at least for now, address your question?
Yes.
Thank you. And Mr. Marston, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, so are the other panel members like myself going to be able to provide answers to the questions that Mr. Ferguson had asked Ms. Norris that she was unable to answer?
if Mr. Ferguson would like to ask them of you.
Okay,
That's up to him.
Yeah, I have a series of questions for Mr. Marston.
All right, I'll hand things back over to you, Mr. Ferguson.
Great. So can we go ahead and bring up Mr. Marston's testimony? It's SCS2. And turn to page 11. This did not look like SCS2. Right?
It's SCS3.
I think we want SCS3 if
Oh.
Mr. Marston's testimony.
no, mine's SCS2. And I'm on page 11.
No, your testimony is SCS3, and my understanding is, and your CV is SCS2, Mr. Marston.
Okay, well, on the copy that I have, it has SCS2, testimony of Leslie. But go ahead.
Great. So in your testimony on page 11, at lines 9 through 13, you state that groundwater must be considered when discussing appropriation of surface water resources because surface water systems are connected to groundwater systems, correct?
Yes, surface waters passing over land, a certain percentage of that will naturally percolate through the soil and recharge groundwater basins.
So would you agree that the location of the Calusa Indian Community Council's groundwater wells relative to surface water bodies such as the Sacramento River would be important to determining whether sites diversions may affect the council's groundwater wells?
It could be, but not necessarily.
Why would it not necessarily be important?
Well, the Sacramento River may charge a groundwater basin. The Sacramento River may not be hydrologically connected to a basin that lies directly under the reservation, but it could be hydrologically connected to another basin or underground stream that then flows from that basin or that underground stream into the groundwater basins below the reservation that recharge those groundwaters of the reservation.
So is this passage of your testimony intended to suggest that sites diversions would have impact on the water availability in the council's groundwater wells?
They most certainly could. Let me explain why. If you start diverting waters away from the Sacramento River over to this dam and reservoir, that lessens the amount of water that is going down the river. The water that's going down the river, there's a lesser amount that then may flow into hydrologically connected groundwater basins, so that over a period of time, the static levels of those groundwater basins continue to go down and go down and go down. And the tribes, if they're not monitoring those static levels through a comprehensive groundwater basin plan where they're maintaining those groundwaters on a sustained yield basis, you could then have a drought condition where all of a sudden there's not enough water in those basins to be able to fulfill all the purposes for which the reservation was created, including sufficient waters to maintain a fishery. And there's absolutely no doubts that reservations downstream from the diversion point, like the Calusa Indian community, they have a fishing right. They have a federally reserved fishing right. The Wintun relied on fish. They fished in the Sacramento River. They took salmon. So as I was trying to state earlier, the only real way you're going to be able to determine what impacts these diversions are going to have and let's just take, for example, the Calusa's federally reserved water right, is if there is, number one, a comprehensive groundwater basin study. Number two, a comprehensive watershed management study on the reservation to be able to determine how that groundwater is affected by surface runoff, surface recharge, recharge from the Sacramento River, recharge from other bodies of water that may flow through or be hydrologically connected, not to the Sacramento River and to those reservation groundwater basins. That's why I was trying to say this morning, I don't think you have enough information to be able to make an informed decision.
So, Mr. Marston, have you provided any specific analysis that demonstrates the site's diversions may impact groundwater recharge in and around the council's wells?
I don't have to, because I'm not the decision maker. You are. It's up to you to determine what impacts the approval of these diversions are going to have on the tribe's federally reserved water rights or any other downstream users from the diversions.
So, Mr. Marston, is the answer no, that you haven't provided a specific analysis showing that the site's diversions could impact groundwater recharge in and around the council's wells?
My testimony is that the only way you're going to be able to determine what impact these diversions are going to have on tribal federally reserved water rights is to undertake the studies necessary to determine those impacts. And you haven't done that.
Mr. Marston, you do need to answer Mr. Ferguson's question, though.
I haven't done the studies. Nobody's done the studies. Where's the comprehensive groundwater management plan?
And that's fine. Thank you. I think now you've answered the question. Go ahead, Mr. Ferguson.
Thank you. So, Mr. Marston, are you familiar with the testimony of Jeffrey Davids in this proceeding?
No.
So you're not aware that the site's authority offered the testimony from a groundwater expert about the potential impacts of groundwater related to site's reservoir operations?
No, I'm not. But what studies has he? What hydrological studies has he undertaken on the Calusa Indian community's reservation to determine what impacts diversions from the Sacramento River would have on their groundwater basin?
Well, I'm not here to answer the questions, so I will continue asking you the questions. And I guess your answer is you're not familiar with this testimony. Is that correct?
My answer is that if this expert rendered an expert opinion, he didn't have the information necessary to render that expert opinion.
Okay, and you're not a groundwater expert, is that correct?
No, but I've been in tribal attorney that's been practicing in the area of federal Indian law for the last 46 years, including representing the Chemehuevis in the general stream adjudication of the Colorado River in California versus Arizona, and the Cahuilla Indian tribe in the general stream adjudication of the Santa Margarita River, and representing.
Mr. Marston, I have your CV. It's quite impressive, but thank you. I think let's get back to Mr. Ferguson.
So no, I'm not a hydrologist. But I deal with hydrologists almost on a daily basis. And if I could answer the
Can we turn to page 12 of your testimony?
Sure.
In the first line on page 12, Mr. Marston, you used the phrase the effect. Which effect are you talking about there?
The effect of upstream diversions.
And are those effects the effects that you will that you believe will occur to groundwater?
To surface runoff, to surface waters, to groundwaters.
So on this same page, you state that the site's reservoir project will negatively impact tribes of the Central Valley through its diversions of water from the river during all water years, correct?
In my opinion, yes.
So what is your basis for your opinion that there will be negative impacts?
You're doing an upstream diversion, taking water that would naturally flow through the Sacramento River, that would naturally flow downstream to the Calusa Indian community and be available to the Calusa Indian community, and making that amount of water not available to them. And they have a superior federally reserved right, which under the federal common law preempts the field and preempts all state law in the area. So it's federal law, not state law, that governs here. And you're not making that water available to them, which they have a priority date of March 1st, 1853, which is superior to probably every single other entity other than Indian tribes and the United States government over the United States government's waters within the state. You're not making that water away from them. All you need to do is read the United States Supreme Court's decision in Winters versus United States, because that's exactly what was happening in Winters.
So what's your basis for saying they wouldn't have water available that they would otherwise divert?
Because you're removing water from the natural course of the Sacramento River. There's not as much water. There's not going to be as much water available downstream. That will have impacts.
So have you done any sort of specific technical analysis indicating they wouldn't have water available?
I don't need to do technical analysis to know if there's not as much water available downstream. There will be effects from that. There will either be a lesser amount of water available for maintaining the tribe's fishery. There'll be less water available for to recharge groundwater basins below the reservation. The only issue is, and what this technical studies would show, would be how much of an impact that diversion is going to have. And my greatest fear is, because we don't know how big the impact is going to be, that diversions over a period of time will lower groundwater basins to a level that during a critical drought year, there will not be enough water to go around, and will not be enough water even when the tribe invokes its priority date to meet the purposes for which the reservation was created, in direct violation of federal law.
But assuming it's true that the tribe has a priority date of March 1st, 1853, wouldn't they be able to call on water that sites would otherwise divert if there was a shortage?
That remedy may be ineffective. Absolutely, to answer your question, absolutely the tribe can go into federal court and can sue upstream users and seek an injunction in joining those diversions. But if over the years the diversions have lessened the amount of saturation from the Sacramento River into the groundwater basins lying underneath the reservation, so that the water table has gone down, so that there's now not enough water in the basins to not only meet the purposes, the tribe's needs, and fulfill the purposes for which the reservation was granted, but there is even a fear that what could happen over a long period of time, that those groundwater basins are lessened to a point where you can no longer maintain the basins on a sustained yield basis. And that would be both in direct violation of federal law and under your own SIGMA, your own state law that requires the state to maintain groundwater basins on a sustained yield basis. Again, I get back to the fact that there's not enough information, and the burden's not on the tribes. The decision maker who's issuing the permit to allow for the diversions, they do not have enough information to make an informed decision.
But you acknowledged you're not familiar with Dr. David's testimony, correct?
No, but feel you don't need to be a rocket scientist to know that if you remove water upstream so that there's not enough water in the channel or bed of the river, then there's not more water available for surface runoffs during rainy seasons, because the Sacramento flows and there's a certain amount of overflow that will flow over reservation lands and cause groundwater saturation. And there's not as much water available to recharge groundwater basins that are hydrologically connected to the Sacramento River.
Mr. Marston, you mentioned that you believe that Calusa tribe has a March 1st, 1853 priority date for its water right. What is your basis for that statement?
Well, as I'm sure you're well aware, the 1853 statute expressly exempted from the declaration of declaring all of the surplus lands that the Congress did not set aside to confirm Mexican land grants under the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, did not set aside for specific federal purposes, did not set aside for the states for school purposes under Section 36s, and did not set aside for the railroads under Section 1s. All the remaining lands were declared lands on the public domain, except under Section 6 of the Act, Congress expressly reserved any lands under the use and occupation of any Indian tribes. That's a reservation. It created a reservation. And it gave expressed recognition to the tribe's Aboriginal rights. If a tribe like Calusa was occupying those lands, and later those lands were encompassed in an executive order or a purchase, creating a formal Indian reservation, then there's a continued use of occupancy from March 1st, 1853 to the present. And that gives the tribe a priority date because the reservation of the lands that they're currently occupying were reserved under the 1853 statute.
Do you discuss any of this in your testimony
I do.
with respect to the Calusa tribe?
Well, yes, I do, because I give general information about that's applicable to all tribes. And Calusa is most certainly a federally recognized Indian tribe.
Okay. All right, so is this page 12? I apologize. Yes,
think-
it is. Sorry about that. Yeah, so at line 7 through 8, Mr. Marston.
I'd like to supplement what my testimony regarding your question regarding the effects on the Calusa Indian community. One of the other things that happens, one of the other effects, is if you divert water out of the river, you reduce the amount of water that's in the river, then there's changes to the ecological makeup of the river downstream from the diversion. We've seen that time and time again on other rivers that have anadromous fisheries. And as other experts have testified to, one of the effects can be a changing of flow during critical times of upstream and outstream migration of anadromous fish. And one of the effects can be temperature, which is critical for spawning for salmon. Calusa has a reserved fishing right, which means one of the purposes for which the reservation was created was enough water to be maintained in the Sacramento River to preserve that fishery. So once again, you approve a diversion without having sufficient studies to see what the long-term impacts are going to be on removing that water out of the river on salmon. And you find out that as a result of the diversions, temperatures rise a few degrees, salmon upstream migration of salmon and the spawning of salmon start to decrease. It's very hard once those impacts occur to go back and then try to restore or remedy the harm that has been caused to the fishery. So again, I don't think the state has enough information to be able to make an informed decision about whether or not these diversions are going to impact federally reserved fishing rights.
Mr. Marston, have you reviewed any of the authority's evidence, for example, in the EIR concerning aquatic biological resources?
No.
And have you reviewed the authority's incidental take permit application materials submitted as evidence in this proceeding?
No.
Okay.
But I have been litigating anadromous fishing issues on the Klamath River since 1977. And I have my own personal knowledge about what impacts flows will have on salmon populations and temperatures will have on salmon populations, and how even minor diversions of water during critical drought years can have major impacts on salmon populations that can have devastating impacts on the salmon runs.
Yeah, I'd like to move to strike. I mean, that's non-responsive. You'd answered the question and
That's fair. Mr.
Okay.
Marston, please do focus on responding to Mr. Ferguson's questions. Certainly there'll be a chance for Friends of the River to submit rebuttal testimony, but I would like to make sure we can get through Mr. Ferguson's questions, please.
so Mr. Marston, on page 8, page 12, at lines 8 through 9, it states that the Sacramento River and Bay Delta watersheds are already faced with overallocations. Correct?
I'm getting there. Let's see here. The water diversions are planned for the project diversion. Okay, I'm on page 12. I'm looking at line 8 and 9. And that begins with water diversions that are planned for the project will divert and degrade water from the Sacramento River Basin. Is that where you're at?
No, at line 8, it states the Sacramento River and Bay Delta watersheds are already faced with over allocations. You see that testimony?
On page 12?
Yes.
Oh, the Sacramento River and Bay Delta are already faced on that. Okay, yes, there it is. I found it.
Okay. Are you familiar with the authority's water availability analysis offered in this proceeding?
Can you be more specific?
Are you aware that the authority has presented evidence regarding water availability for the project?
I am generally aware of that, yes.
Okay.
But
Are you aware that the analysis identifies water available for the site's project after consideration of senior rights?
yes, but none of that analysis includes an analysis of federally reserved Indian water rights. There's not one iota of data or information regarding federally reserved water rights.
Are you aware of any tribes who have indicated that they're concerned that water would not be available if the site's project was implemented and diverting water?
I don't understand your question. It was unintelligible to me. Could you repeat it? If you're asking me whether I've had tribal leaders express to me their concerns that the diversion will directly impact their federally reserved water rights, the answer is yes.
And if those federally reserved rights are senior to the project, then there shouldn't be any concern about being able to protect those rights in the future with the sites project in place, correct?
No, that is totally incorrect. I don't know how you can make that assumption. You can't make that assumption, first of all, because you don't have the data or information to be able to make that assumption. And if anything, again, as I previously testified to, you're approving a diversion of water upstream. Let's take, for example, the Calusa Indian community, who has a federally reserved water right to be able to take as much water out of the river as necessary to fulfill the purposes for which the reservation was created. That's as much water as is necessary to recharge groundwater basins that lie below the reservation that are hydrologically connected to the Sacramento River, to maintain those basins on a sustained yield basis. That's as much water as is necessary to create a homeland for the Indians on the reservation. That's to be able to provide their members with residential housing. That's to be able to develop businesses on the reservation, have enough water for their businesses. That's enough water to protect endangered species. That's enough water to protect flora and fauna and a watershed so that the watershed can adequately retain water and recharge those basins. That's enough water to maintain sufficient water at sufficient flows with sufficient temperatures to maintain their fishery. You divert those waters away from the reservation and you do it over a period of time. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to know there are going to be impacts. There's not going to be enough water flowing down through the natural channel of the river. There's not going to be as much water available for groundwater recharge. And over a period of time, without knowing how much water is necessary to continue to recharge those basins so that they can be maintained on a sustained yield basis. In other words, you got to have enough water coming in to be able for the Calusa Indian community to take that water out and use it for all of the purposes necessary to fulfill the purposes for which the reservation was created, and still have enough water in the basin so that the basin exists. And you don't have that data and you don't have that information.
So are you aware of any analysis of the quantity of water that you believe, for example, the Calusa tribe's rights would support?
That's the problem. No.
No, I'm asking you the question. That's a yes or no question. Do you have an analysis of the quantity of water?
Well, look, at the court reporter can't take down what you say and can't take down what I say. So I won't interrupt you when you're talking and you don't interrupt me when I'm talking. My answer was no, because there's no studies. That's the problem.
But your testimony is that the tribe's rights would be impaired by sites diversions, correct? Because there's not enough water available in the system.
That is correct. The one thing that we do know is A, there will be a diversion. B, there will not be the same amount of water flowing down the Sacramento River to the Calusa Indian Reservation that there would be if the diversion takes place. And therefore, there's not going to be as much water available for Calusa to appropriate pursuant to its priority date and its federally reserved water right to fulfill the purposes for which the reservation is created. That we know. What we don't know is, because the state has not undertaken the studies, is just what impact diverting that water away from Calusa so it's not available to them is going to have on their federally reserved water right. And my experience has been the less water you have, the greater the impact. Water's life. And to fulfill the purposes for which the reservation was created, the tribe needs its water. It may not be using all of its water now. It may not be using all of the water that it's entitled to, but at some point in time, it will.
But if you haven't conducted a rough quantitative analysis to determine what their rights might support, you can't reach the conclusion that there won't be water available for them, even after site's project diverts water, correct?
That is correct, but I don't have to do that because I'm not the decision maker. The decision maker's decision cannot be arbitrary or capricious. It has to be based on facts and information and data. And what I'm trying to get across to the state in these proceedings is they have governmental entities that have federally protected rights. Believe it or not, those waters in the Sacramento River, in addition to the fact that they are navigable, that the waters in the Sacramento River, the amount necessary to fulfill the purposes for which the reservation was created, are owned by the United States of America in trust for the tribe. And there has not been an analysis done by the state to be able to determine what the short-term and most certainly what the long-term impacts of a diversion upstream from the reservation is going to have on the reservation. And my major concern is, unless the tribe is able to get up and get going and getting the studies done to determine those impacts, and I don't think the burden should be on them. They're not the decision maker. The applicant is coming to the state and asking the state for the application. The burden's on them to get the information necessary to make an informed decision. They don't have the information, and my concern is if they approve these diversions.
Mr. Marston, thank you. You had a lot of time and we've been over this. I appreciate you have a thorough response here, but I'd like to get back to Mr. Ferguson's questions. Otherwise, and also I just wanted to check in. Do you need a break at 3 o'clock? Is that my understanding based on your schedule?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll see if we.
It may be 3:15. It may be 3:15. I tried to put. Can I take just 1 second? Won't even take me a second. Hold on.
Okay, and maybe during that second, Mr. Ferguson, can you tell me how much? I don't know if you have an estimate, but a guesstimate on how much longer you may have with Mr. Marston.
All right, I pushed it back to 3:30.
Okay.
I would say 15 minutes.
Okay, great. So let's continue and let's try to get through this before Mr. Marston needs to break at 3:30.
Thank you.
Mr. Marston, on pages 12 and 13 of your testimony, in paragraphs 36 and 37, you discuss tribally reserved fishing rights in the Klamath Basin, correct?
Correct.
So what is your purpose of these two paragraphs 36 and 37?
Well, the purpose is to show how critical water is for the maintaining of fisheries, including anadromous fisheries, and to show that encompassed within the tribe's federally reserved water rights is the right to have as much water as is necessary to maintain a fishery. If the tribe has a tradition of fishing, then one of the purposes for which the reservation was created was for the Indians to be able to fish and to maintain a subsistence, commercial, and cultural fishery. So you have that exact situation here on the Sacramento River with, again, I'll give the example with the Calusa Indian community.
So you cite a few cases that speak to the tribal fishing rights of the tribes in the Klamath Basin, correct?
Yes.
And is it your opinion that those cases support the conclusion that tribes along the Sacramento River hold tribal fishing rights as well?
Yes.
And what is your basis for using those cases to reach that conclusion?
Well, because those cases stand for the proposition that if one of the purposes for which the reservation was created was to allow the tribes to fish and maintain a fishery, then the tribes are entitled to as much water as is necessary to maintain that fishery.
And so do you have any evidence that any of the tribes that may be impacted by the sites project have as a purpose of their reservation the maintenance or protection of fishing rights?
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubts that and I'll really leave this to Chairman Mitchum, who will testify later, but I don't think there's any doubts that the Wintu relied heavily on fishing and fished in the Sacramento River and fished for salmon in the Sacramento River. That's well documented.
But you're not aware of any evidence that's been offered in this proceeding that speaks to that issue. Is that correct?
Well, I'm offering the evidence. There's legal authority to support the proposition that when a reservation is created along a river or encompasses part of a river like Colusa, and the Indians from that reservation have a tradition of fishing, that one of the purposes for which the reservation was created was to reserve the Indians the right to take fish and to maintain as much water as is necessary to maintain their fishery.
But let's take the Colusa tribe as an example. You said if one of the purposes was maintenance of a fishery, then that right would exist. But my question to you is, have you offered any evidence demonstrating that one of those purposes, in fact, with respect to the Colusa tribe, was fishing?
Yeah, the creation of the reservation.
Simply through the creation of the reservation, is sufficient? And that's your opinion?
Yes, under the case law, when a reservation is created, the purpose is to create a homeland for the Indians. And one of the things that the courts do is they look to see how traditionally, before white contact, the tribes lived, maintained their lifestyle, and what did they use the lands and waters that they occupied for. And the case law is pretty clear that if the Indians had a tradition of fishing and relied on a fishery to sustain themselves, both in pre-white contact and after white contact, that one of the purposes for which the reservation was created was to reserve to the Indians a right to take fish. And if the Indians have a right to take fish, under the case law, they have a right to appropriate as much water, or maintain, I should say, as much water in the river as is necessary to maintain the fishery.
Okay. Within these paragraphs, are you attempting to offer an opinion about the sites project's potential impacts on the Trinity River system?
Only to the extent that if there are Indian reservations that either border along or have groundwater that are hydrologically connected to the Trinity River, or there are tribes that can assert off-reservation Aboriginal rights that were reserved under the 1853 statute, no. But as to those tribes that I just mentioned, yes, in the same manner, in the same capacity that I've just testified to with respect to Colusa.
So it is your opinion that sites project may impair or impact the Trinity River system?
Again, the answer is yes, with a heavy emphasis on may, because again, I don't think the state has done any studies or even any analysis of what impacts approving a diversion at the diversion point will have on tribal or individual Indian federally reserved water rights.
So are you aware of a proposed water right term that the authorities offered in this proceeding concerning the Trinity River system?
No, I am not.
Okay. Okay, finally, on page 13 of your testimony, at lines 2 through 7, you state that the holding in US v. Adair that if a reservation is terminated or the tribe loses access and returns, its water rights are maintained, is important for tribes reclaiming traditional lands along waterways like the Shingle Springs Band, correct?
Correct.
So is the land that comprises the Shingle Springs Band's purchased land that was, excuse me, let me start over. Is the land that comprises the Shingle Springs Band's purchased land that was formerly in an Indian reservation?
Their land was, well, let's back up.
Well,
So I'm
can
gonna,
we,
I'm gonna answer your question. It's gonna be a fairly lengthy answer so that people can understand a little bit of the history of how you got there, right? And why there's a continuous chain of title. So, as I stated in my testimony, Congress never ratified the 18 California treaties. So, based on Helen Hunt Jackson's novel, A Century of Dishonor, which brought national focus or attention on the plight of California Indians, Congress enacted the 1853 statute to try to protect Indian occupancy. It wasn't enough. And in many cases, and in most cases, Indians were either hunted down and killed, but they were driven off their land. In other cases, the Indians relocated to the treaty areas only to find that the United States government wouldn't protect their occupancy. As a result of that, Congress appointed C.E. Kelsey, the San Jose attorney, as a special agent for Congress to go out and report on the condition of California Indians. Kelsey submitted his report, and in response to that, Kelsey's recommendation was, Congress, what you need to do is set aside and buy land for Indians. So Congress began appropriating money under the 1904 and 1906 Homeless California Indian Acts.
Hearing Officer Kinsey, this is interesting, but it's non-responsive. I asked a simple question about the land that the Shingle Springs tribe has recently purchased.
You did, Mr. Ferguson, and you're right, but also this is Mr. Marston, if you would move it along, but I am actually interested in it relevant to his testimony, so we'll just treat it as if I asked the question, but go ahead.
So the executive branch, like Congress, also acted to begin setting aside lands. So let's take Shingle Springs. Shingle Springs, if I remember correctly, and you just think I'm young and handsome, I'm actually old and an old guy. But if I remember right, their Congress originally appropriated money under the 1906 Homeless California Indian Act, and a parcel of land was purchased for Shingle Springs. In 1958, Congress wanted to get out of the Indian business. And so Dillon Meyer was rewarded for coming up with a solution during the Second World War, the Japanese problem. That was moving the Japanese to concentration camps. He was appointed Commissioner of Indian Affairs, and his idea or solution to the Indian problem was termination. And so which was for the United States government to get out of the Indian business. So Congress enacted the California Rancheria Act, which slated 48 small Indian reservations in the state of California for termination, which means the boundaries of the reservation would literally be erased. The United States government owning Shingle Springs land, title would be taken out of the name of the United States government. The reservation would be subdivided, and the government would convey individual parcels of land to individual Indians, removing the trust status. and doing away with the right of the tribe to be able to form or maintain a tribal government, ending the government to government relationship. That happened to Shingle Springs, along with a number of other federally recognized Indian tribes. I and another lawyer filed a lawsuit called the Tilly Hardwick versus the United States. Under the California Rancheria Act, the United States government, prior to termination, was supposed to make certain improvements on the rancheria. They were supposed to install water systems and septic systems and make other improvements that they and the Indians agreed upon. The government didn't do that. They violated the California Rancheria Act. We interpreted the act as requiring those services to be provided as a precondition to the issuance of the conveyance. We went into federal court and sued, and we won. And so we went to the federal courts and said, since the services weren't provided, the conveying of the deeds was improvident and void. And so the federal government voided the termination process that allowed the and we went in and got the federal court to reestablish the boundaries of the Shingle Springs Rancheria and allow the Indians who still own land within the Rancheria, restore that to trust status. And we got the court to declare all lands within those boundaries Indian country.
Thank you, Mr. Marston, but let's get back to Mr. Ferguson's question. And Mr. Ferguson, so you know, I asked my team, this didn't count as authority time, so that was taken out of my time. But let's get back to your question, which I don't think we had answered.
Okay, I just, Vice Chair Tayaba, in her direct testimony, mentioned a piece of land that the Shingle Springs Band has recently purchased next to the river in Verona, correct?
Okay.
Did you hear that testimony?
I believe so.
Okay. Are you aware of whether that piece of land that the Shingle Springs Band purchased
Is part of their Aboriginal territory?
No, was part of their reservation, or has ever been part of their reservation?
I didn't hear that, but if it was purchased and was part of their original reservation, then it carries the same priority date, dating all the way back to the time that the reservation was created. That's the law.
Wait a minute,
Fair
Mr.
enough, but the question is,
sorry, Mr. Ferguson, I jumped in. I just want to clarify, Mr. Marston, Mr. Ferguson is referring to your own testimony on page 13 in paragraph 37, where I believe you refer to the recently purchased the land of traditional village site along the Feather and Sacramento River confluence.
Okay, that's different than what his question was.
I
don't think so, but Mr. Ferguson, I'll turn to you to clarify that.
Thank you. It was not intended to be different. I was linking Vice Chair Tayaba's testimony to your testimony, Mr. Marston, thinking you were both talking about the same piece of land. So my question again is the land that you're referring to here, that I understand is the same piece of land Vice Chair Tayaba is referring to. Is that piece of land part of the Shingle Springs Band's reservation?
If it lies within the boundaries of the reservation, then the answer is yes.
Are you familiar with the boundary of the Shingle Springs Band's reservation?
I should be, since I obtained the federal court order, I think, that restored those boundaries, but I can't remember off the top of my head whether this particular parcel lies within those boundaries. All I can tell you is that if it does, then it's part of the reservation. There's Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 1151, that defines all land within the boundaries of an Indian reservation as Indian country. And it's Indian country that makes land set aside for Indians subject to federal and tribal jurisdiction and not state jurisdiction.
I have no more questions for Mr. Marston.
Thank you, Mr. Ferguson. I have another question, and I know I'm jumping in, so I appreciate this. Mr. Marston, will you just clarify for me, generally speaking, where the reservation of the Shingle Springs Band is located that you're referring to?
Yes, if you go up highway, let's see, it's Highway 50 just past Placerville. I know it really well because I like to go whitewater rafting in the American River. Anyway, there is a freeway turnoff and an overpass, and it goes to Red Hawk Casino, and that's where the ranchery is.
So thank you. I'm actually very familiar with that exit. But here in your testimony, referring to purchase of land along the Feather and Sacramento River confluence, that sounds to me like it is not anywhere near the reservation you are describing.
It would not be.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you. And Mr. Ferguson, back to you. Thank you for humoring me.
Great. I'm going to move on to Vice Chair Tayaba.
Am I released, or can I ask Miss Willie, is she gonna need me for any redirect or recross?
Well, I will at some point, I know you have another commitment, but at some point I will also be turning to whether the Department of Water Resources, state water contractors, or Bureau of Reclamation have questions for you. They also have a right to cross-examine as well. But in the meantime, Mr. Ferguson is going to be, I think, asking questions of Vice Chair Tayaba and Mr. Mulcahy. So I don't know that we'll get to that today, but we may need to see you again on Wednesday.
Okay, I just needed to know whether you wanted me to get back on after my call, which should be over at about 4 o'clock or 4:15.
Why don't you coordinate with Ms. Willie, and Ms. Willie, you'll be here so we can maintain that communication. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
To you, Mr. Ferguson.
Thank you. Vice Chair Tayaba, are you available?
She may not be available. I know she was also driving to do. Oh, okay. She also had a child pickup, so.
I do have a child pickup, but I'm actually here, so maybe we can get this done.
Thank you. I'd like to bring up your testimony, which is FOR 6. Great. Can we turn to page 2? So at lines 13 through 15, you state that additional diversions will exacerbate an already damaged and degraded delta ecosystem and our tribe's ties to our homelands, correct?
Yes.
So what is your basis for this statement?
Because right now the state of the water and when we go to use the water, we're not allowed to all of the time because of blooms, because of E. coli. We have certain gathering areas that we like to go to. Obviously, our villages are on the river, and we find that a lot of our plants are being affected, obviously our fish, but all of the life beings that are on the river that we use, I believe are struggling.
So have you offered any evidence in this proceeding concerning how sites divergence may exacerbate an already damaged and degraded delta ecosystem?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, have you offered any testimony in this proceeding concerning how the sites project's diversions may damage or degrade the delta ecosystem?
Well, I think when I talk about traditional ecological knowledge, that in itself is the effect that, in fact, tribal people will no longer have some of these original areas, beans, all of that. So that's the effect. Me talking about traditional knowledge is the core of our mission as the tribe. And those are the negative effects that I think we would have, because the biggest concern is that we will have a river for our children to fish out of, and that river would provide all of the needs, all of our needs.
So have you offered any testimonies or any evidence more specific than your testimony regarding these potential impacts?
No.
Okay. On page 3 of your testimony, I don't have the line number. Sorry. Let's skip that. Actually, on page 3 at lines 25 through 26, you state that reduced flows have caused fish populations to plummet, correct?
Yes.
Have you conducted any analyses of the relationship between flows and fish populations?
I myself know.
So you're not offering any opinions of your own on the relationship between flows and fish in your testimony, correct?
What lines? Can you repeat the lines? I'm sorry.
Sure, sorry. At 25 through 26.
Well, yeah, I mean, I believe that less flows will have a major impact on all of the life beings in the river.
But you did confirm that you hadn't conducted any analyses.
True.
Okay, thank you. Can we move to page 4, please? At lines 9 and 10, you state that insufficient in-stream flows have facilitated the spread of HABs throughout the Bay Delta, correct?
Yes.
And what is your basis for that statement?
Well, I mean, HABs, as I stated before, we've actually had to cancel our ceremonies due to HABs because the water was just unsafe. So we, of course, we canceled, and so that's how it affects us. Also, one of the areas that we gather our yearly tule supply for boats, they have been getting blooms also.
So in your testimony, you referred to insufficient in-stream flows facilitating the spread of HABs, correct?
Yes.
So are you aware of or have you conducted any analyses indicating HABs are caused by insufficient in-stream flows?
Can you repeat that?
Are you aware of or have you conducted any analyses indicating HABs are spread by insufficient in-stream flows?
I guess, no, I don't. I can't answer that question.
Have you evaluated whether the sites project diversions would increase the frequency or magnitude of what you refer to as insufficient in-stream flows?
Well, I know for sure if that project got approved, that it would definitely affect the flows coming down river.
But you're not aware of whether it would affect them in such a way that it would facilitate the spread of HABs, correct?
Well, if less water is coming down the waterway, and that water is warmer, then obviously it would support more blooms.
But again, you haven't conducted any analyses to see if there would be less and warmer water downstream, correct?
No.
Sites project in place. Okay. On page 4, in paragraph 8, at lines 13 through 14, you state that the State Water Board confirmed 46 HAB incidents in the Bay Delta, correct?
Yeah.
What do you mean by saying the State Water Board confirmed these incidents?
That was just what I had looked at and just saw as data.
Okay. Is it your understanding that, well, when you say you looked at data, what source were you looking at?
I do not recall. Can you remind me the number or the line? Sorry.
Yeah, lines 13 and 14. You want me to ask the question again?
No.
Okay, do you want to answer my question then? Sorry.
I'm sorry. I did already. What was the question again?
Yeah, sorry, you said you'd looked at data regarding these 46 HAB incidents, correct?
Yes, but I did not recall which data I was looking at.
Okay. Is it your understanding that this data may be self-reported data?
No, that's not my understanding.
So what is your understanding in terms of how the data makes its way into the data source you were looking at?
Well, the data source that I was looking at was actually the source that came from our testing that we've done within the tribe. I'm sorry, I was getting it confused with another set of data. So that data, our tribe actually has gotten to the point where we've actually been able to get some of those resources. So we have our own environmental person who has been testing.
So is it your environmental person that in 2021 identified 46 HAB incidents in the Bay Delta? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
So in what way did this State Water Board confirm the incidents that your tribal representatives identified?
Repeat that.
Yeah, my understanding of your testimony is that tribal representatives did the water quality testing that found 46 HAB incidents in the Bay Delta. Is that correct?
Yes.
And your sentence here on lines 13 through 14 on page 4 states that the State Water Board confirmed those incidents, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so in what way did the State Water Board confirm those incidents?
Maybe I'm not sure if I meant them, but I know we confirmed it. Part of our issue was using the state's information, but really wanting some of our own data. So the data is from our own water monitoring, and that's basically what I meant.
Okay. Have you provided any reports or summary of these incidents that are described on lines 13 and 14? In this, with your testimony or in this proceeding?
I'm sorry, you have to repeat the question. My child was talking to me.
Have you provided any data or reports related to these incidents that are mentioned in line 14 on page 4?
I have the data, but I have not provided it,
Okay.
because it's our data.
In the next two lines, Vice Chair Tayaba, you mentioned that the HAB count relies on voluntary public reporting. And that the actual number of incidents was likely much higher, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so I think you previously answered.
So I think I got it mixed up, but to clear it up, that wasn't our data. That's the State Water Board data. And basically, it was just brought to our attention.
Okay. Thanks for that clarification. So I'd like to ask you about the last sentence in the paragraph still. And specifically, your basis for the statement that since the count relies on voluntary public reporting, the number of incidents was likely much higher. What is your basis for that conclusion?
I don't know.
Okay. Can we please move to page 5? And I'm going to ask you some questions about paragraphs 10, 11, and 12, okay? Are you aware of any evidence indicating that this site's project authority would increase the occurrence of HABs in the lower Sacramento River? You might be on mute.
Can you repeat the question?
Yes. Are you aware of any evidence indicating that the site's project authority would increase the occurrence of HABs in the lower Sacramento River?
Just like I had mentioned before, that I don't have any evidence other than what I know, and just having less water flow down, I believe would create a better habitat for blooms.
Okay. Are you aware of any evidence indicating that the site's project authority would increase the concentration of microcystins in the lower Sacramento River?
Just once again, based on information that we've received, we that more or less water coming down would create more blooms.
Which information are you referring to?
Well, just based even on our own science that we've been able to collect, that science along with even just the state's numbers, I think is convincing. And based on what we see, what we've experienced on the river, I think that that's proven.
So just to confirm that the sites project is not in operation, correct?
Correct.
And so it's not reflected in the data you're referring to, correct?
No,
Okay.
but sites would be taking more water, so it would just contribute to the type of river that we have right now.
Are you aware of any evidence indicating that the Sites Project Authority would increase the concentration of E. coli in the Sacramento River?
I think that it would, yes.
And what's your basis for thinking that it would?
Based on the condition of the water, and when we go to gather, when we go for a ceremony, that there are blooms in the water.
So I'm referring to E. coli.
Oh, E. coli, E. coli has taken over our village of Pashune. So I am very well convinced that if less water is coming down, that village in particular will be even worse when it's already very bad.
But you haven't conducted any independent analysis of whether the Sites Project diversions would increase the
No,
occurrence of
because
E. coli, correct?
no, because it hasn't happened. But based on what has happened, it's already in a bad state. So I believe that if there's any more diversions, that it would be worse.
Okay. So moving on to lines 21 and 22 on page 5. You mentioned that true and meaningful tribal consultation regarding the site's reservoir has not occurred. In fact, my tribe was not consulted at all, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Can we bring up sites 95, please? And then turn to PDF pages 333 and 334. So Vice Chair Tayaba, are you familiar with this document? I'll give you a chance to look at it.
I am not. But is that just one letter, or were there many letters, or was that one?
Well, I'm just asking about this letter. Are you familiar with this, what appears to be email correspondence?
No.
Are you familiar with the recipient address in this, which is rquaylar@ssband.org?
Yes, that's Chairwoman.
Okay, so this email was addressed to the chairwoman of the Shingle Springs Band?
Yes.
Okay. And this occurred on what date?
This was on July 8th. And I'm trying to think of the big meeting that was up north that we attended. And it is from that meeting that I actually believe we started getting at least some phone calls. But this one in particular, I personally have not seen.
Is it your understanding from this email that at least as early as July 8th, 2021, and perhaps sooner, that at least representatives of the site's authority attempted to consult with the Shingle Springs Band?
Okay.
Well, I'm just asking, does it
Um,
appear from this
I
email
mean,
correspondence if that's the case?
that could,
Hold on.
it seems like there's a letter, but, one letter is one letter. I don't know. I hope that there's more. But the other part of, why maybe it's hard, you know, for us to consult is because at that time, we really didn't have the resources also. And so that is also a contributing factor.
Do you know if the Shingle Springs band responded to this email and indicated that they're interested in consulting, but they just don't have the resources?
Yeah, because there was Delta conveyance, there's tribal beneficial uses, the Delta plan, I mean, there was just a lot of things going on. And so I think it's been hard for us. I'm 44 years old and it's taken most of my life for my tribe to get to this point, just because of the lack of resources that we've had. We've only been able to kind of get on our feet here, in just a handful of years. So that I think is a big reason why. And I know you're showing me one letter, but one letter isn't enough all of the time. I think it's important that you keep trying, and maybe there's more. But I know that we were, when I went up north to a meeting, that is when I believe we kind of started to learn about sites. But I think that my tribe lacked, especially at that time, a lot of the resources that we need. And we're very busy and trying to defend ourselves here in the Delta, being a Delta tribe. And the other projects like Delta Conveyance has taken up a lot of us. And so I think it's fair to say that tribes just don't have the manpower and the resources to get through all of these things.
Yeah, I appreciate what you're saying, but I'm just asking you, do you know if the tribe responded to the authorities saying that we just don't have the resources to engage right now?
Yeah.
And was that a communication from you to the authority?
It was probably from our cultural resource person.
Okay. So
I-
I'd like to return to your testimony then where you say true and meaningful consultation hasn't occurred. Is that a fair statement in light of this email correspondence?
Yeah, because well, I would actually have to talk with our cultural department. Maybe he has received, he probably has a better look at what letters have come in and which ones haven't. I personally don't, so that's probably the best I can answer that.
So, well, at least based on this communication, do you still agree with your statement that the tribe was not consulted at all?
I would say yes,
And why would you say that?
because it's not enough. And
But I'm asking you,
I've talked to a lot of state and federal agencies, and it just seems like even when you do consult, things still happen. So I would still lean on the side of, I guess technically there's a letter that proves you did, but does it feel meaningful? No.
all right, so I'd like to turn to page 6 at lines 18 through 20.
Yeah, and that time was a crazy time. It was a COVID time. Oh.
Is this page 6? Looks like it at lines 18 through 20. You state that the Sites Project Authority must recognize TBUs and incorporate analysis of impacts to such resources into the project planning, correct?
Yes.
Are you aware of a legal obligation that the authority has to recognize these TBUs and incorporate the analysis?
Hold on, please.
Why don't we do this? I think we're in range of a break. And we'll put it up on the screen, but
Sorry, it's my kid like trying to, and then my other kids are waiting to be picked up.
well, I was going to propose a break. I don't know if that's enough time for you, what you need to do. What do you need in terms of what is your schedule?
Well, he's supposed to be picked up at 3:47 and that's now. So I've sent him a message. I'm late. But whatever works.
And Mr. Ferguson, how much more do you think you have in terms of questions?
Just probably 5 minutes.
All right, then maybe let's go ahead and try to push through if that works. All right. Back to you, Mr. Ferguson.
Okay. Vice Chair Tayaba, I think I left off with your testimony on page 6 at lines 18 through 20. I just wanted to ask you whether you're aware of any legal obligation that the authority has to recognize TBUs and incorporate an analysis of impacts into their project planning.
Can you ask me that question in a different way? I'm sorry, I'm just having a hard time understanding.
Yeah. Is your statement on lines 18 through 20 intended to be a statement regarding the authority's legal obligations?
Well, I would think so if they really care about fish.
But do you understand what I mean when I'm asking you whether it's a legal obligation?
I mean, it's not a legal obligation right now.
Can we go back to page 5 at paragraph 10? So in paragraph 10, Vice Chair Tayaba, you state that it is unclear whether microcystin levels of 2.5 to 3 parts per billion are above the safe levels for swimming or cultural uses, correct?
Yes.
All right, can we bring up HO 108? And go to page 2D-36. And can we scroll down further, please? Can we go to page 2D-36? Vice Chair Tayaba, are you familiar with table 2D-2 from the Sites Project Authorities, EIR, EIS.
And Vice Chair Tayaba, if you answered, we may not have heard you, but take your time if you need to
No.
take a look.
I said no, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
All right, so are you familiar that there are you familiar with the California cyanobacteria and harmful algal blooms network?
No,
Okay. So you're not aware that this network posts trigger levels for advisories with respect to harmful algal blooms?
I know this exists, but I have not seen this one.
Okay. All right. Well, that's all the questions I have. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Vice Chair. I understand you need to pick up your children, so thank you. With that, I think it would be appropriate to take a break in part for, well, all of us and the court reporter. Does that work for you, Mr. Mulcahy, if we take a break and then return to any questions Mr. Ferguson may have for you?
It works great for me. I need a break.
Okay, good. Let's go ahead and take 10 minutes and we'll come back at 4:01. Right, it is 4:01. We'll try to get everyone reconvened. To my court reporter, are you ready to go back on the record?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Welcome back, Mr. Mulcahy, and I will hand things over to you, Mr. Ferguson.
All right, thank you very much. Before proceeding with our cross-examination of Mr. Mulcahy, we would like to lodge a number of evidentiary objections to his testimony.
All
And
right.
I can articulate those by paragraph. Paragraphs 5 and
Can you just pause for a moment, Mr. Ferguson? I would like to flip to his testimony really fast. Let's see. It looks like FOR 4. All right,
Yes.
go ahead.
Right. So in paragraphs 5 and paragraphs 50, he offers opinions about the site's application and petition being illegal. And so we wanted to object to those paragraphs as unsupported legal conclusion and legal opinion.
Okay.
Paragraphs 6 through 10, where he offers historical background, it's frankly irrelevant under Government Code 11513 subdivision C.
Could you repeat that?
Yeah, Government Code 11513 subdivision C.
The paragraphs you would like to share?
Yes, paragraphs 6 through 10. Additionally, these paragraphs contain, the probative value of these paragraphs is outweighed by the consumption of time under Government Code 11513 subdivision F, given the fact that all this information is otherwise covered in other parties or other witnesses' testimonies. Paragraphs 11 through 17 are irrelevant. They concern the Baird Fish Hatchery on the McCloud River. Paragraphs 18 and 19 regarding impacts to salmon. It's an admissible opinion testimony by an expert witness under Evidence Code 801. There's no basis in his written testimony to support that he has special knowledge, skill, experience, training, or education to inform his opinions regarding impacts on salmon. In paragraphs 20 through 33, he provides a history of Shasta Dam and projects up to Trinity River. It's irrelevant to the hearing issues. Additionally, an admissible opinion testimony by an expert witness. Paragraphs 37 through 41, he offers opinions concerning biology and biological impacts. Again, an admissible opinion testimony by an expert.
And I'm sorry, Mr. Ferguson, will you run
Yes.
those paragraphs by me one more time?
37 through 41.
Thank you.
Paragraphs 42 through 43 on salmon reintroduction. They're irrelevant to the hearing issues. They're not connected to the project construction, operation, or impacts. And then finally, paragraphs 4, 46, 47, and 48 simply offer summaries of many of these opinions, and they're irrelevant, and again, contain an admissible opinion testimony by an expert. So all the objections, I do still have questions on a few of the paragraphs we did not object to.
Great, that was going to be my next question. So here's what I propose we do on this. And I will look to you also, Ms. Willie. I'm not sure, maybe the first question is for Ms. Willie. I don't know if you and I see there are hands up as well. Who is the appropriate representative who may be responding to these objections? Is it you? Is it someone else? Do you know?
It could be any one of us. I'm not sure.
Okay, but I'll turn to maybe Mr. Busher and then Mr. Mooney, or in any order, either way.
Yeah, I mostly have a process response and question. My understanding is that at some point after the case in chief presentations by all of the parties had been completed, we were going to sit down and have a process day and go through the evidence to be admitted, evidentiary objections to that evidence, etc. And it seems like the time for Mr. Ferguson's objection is during that day, right? Not here today. And to the extent that the site's authority believes that Mr. Mulcahy's testimony is beyond the scope of what they think is relevant, I think the best way to handle that efficiently is to just not ask the questions about that, right? If they're going to object and it's not relevant, that's their position, that's fine. But it seems like we're putting the cart before the horse here. If we're going to go through all of the other witnesses' testimony at the end, I don't know why we're doing objections to Mr. Mulcahy's today.
I think, and Mr. Mooney, I want to hear from you, and Mr. Ferguson, you'll have a chance as well. But I almost had I mean, the other thing is, though, is if Mr. Ferguson is in, I'm going to channel Mr. Ferguson, but if he's in a position where he doesn't know whether certain testimony is going to be in or out, then he will need to take the time to ask his cross-examination questions with respect to that testimony. So there is an efficiency aspect for all of us, whether we gather together for however long it takes for Mr. Ferguson to ask his additional questions, or whether we can cut through some of that. So it may be that it's more efficient to do this to some extent early on rather than saving it all for the end, which is what I'm considering here. I wasn't going to have you do it on the fly right now, at this particular moment, because it is 4:08 p.m. But I was thinking about giving you 2 days, and then when we come back on Wednesday, that we could address these first thing. But I haven't made a decision. That was just an initial thought. But I will turn to you, Mr. Mooney.
Well, I was going to have the same comments, is that it's our understanding that the rules set forth at the beginning was that objections were to be made at the end, and that even and it was my understanding even that the objections would need to be in writing, because he didn't want to have, Mr. Ferguson had raised at the beginning of this, is whether or not we would need to be making written objections, and at the time, and the ruling was that though those would all be handled at the end. So it seems a little unfair at this point to kind of change that at this point and be moving to exclude testimony. I mean, he has the opportunity to cross-examine on that testimony to determine if it's relevant or inadmissible.
And if I can just add one other thing,
Sure.
That understanding of the process was how we went through all of the site's witnesses' testimony as well, right? And we all had to make a determination as to what of the hours of time we had been allotted, right, we wanted to spend asking questions about, right, the hundreds of thousands of pages of material that they submitted and relied upon. And it just seems like all of those evidentiary objections were going to happen at the end. I think that's the right way to approach it, right, for Mr. Mulcahy, like it was for everybody else.
Mr. Ferguson, do you want to respond to what's been said so far?
Yeah, I guess we saw a distinction with these objections because they deal more with scope of his testimony. And then we just wanted to be sure that we were on the record thinking that there was a distinction between the scope of testimony and some other the evidentiary issues that we may deal with at the end of the process. And just to be clear, because there may have been some misunderstanding, I'm only proposing to ask questions regarding the paragraphs that we have not objected to.
And that's helpful. Let me ask this way: if we were to defer, if I were to defer a ruling on these objections with respect to scope, would you have additional questions that you would want to ask, given that Mr. Mulcahy is here for cross-examination now? I mean, I don't mean today, but today or Wednesday.
Excuse me.
Yes, I would still have questions.
In addition to the ones you definitely would ask that are related to the paragraphs that you're not
that
you're not
now I
objecting to right
misunderstood.
now.
Yeah, sorry for the crosstalk. No, I misunderstood. I do not have any additional.
All right. So I think the thing to do, I think if I understand correctly, that these objections, they're on the record, they're noted. I would like to have them in writing. It doesn't have to be an extensive, but just noting down so that everyone can have the particular paragraphs and the basis for the objection. In the past, it has been quite helpful to submit those in a like a table format, so then I can rule on the objections. It would kind of move across. That way, that has been very helpful. I think it does make sense to deal with all of these at the end. At the end being after we've finished the cases in chief. But before we get to rebuttal, so everyone knows what's in and out, right? I think that's the timing that would make sense.
Okay.
So let's set it up that way. But do you have any other comments on that, Mr. Ferguson? And then I'll look to the room.
No.
Thank you. And then Mr. Busher or Mr. Mooney or anyone else, does that clarify where we're going from here?
It does, I think. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate everyone's patience, and I appreciate Mr. Ferguson, you bringing this up. These are important. With that, I will turn things over to you, Mr. Ferguson.
All right. Mr. Mulcahy, I'd like to bring up your testimony starting on page 11 and ask you a few questions. Right. So, Mr. Mulcahy, on lines 4 through 7 of page 11, you mentioned that the construction site lies on the historical lands of the Casheldehe Band of Winton Indians, correct?
Correct.
And you cite the testimony of Chairman Mitchum in an attempt to support this statement, correct?
Correct.
So are you able to tell us which provisions of Chairman Mitchum's testimony you're relying on for this statement?
His testimony in total.
So are you aware that the Sites Project Authority has asked the Casheldehe Band for specific evidence of the tribe's claimed tribal cultural landscape and historic district?
Am I aware?
Yeah.
Is that what you asked? No, I'm not aware.
And are you aware that the Sites Project Authority has asked the Calusa tribe for specific evidence of the tribe's traditional cultural practices?
It's quite possible you have. I'm not aware that you have, but some of those cultural practices would be confidential. And unless they were done in a confidential consultation, you would not be made aware of all of that.
But you're not specifically privy to any information that may have been shared in any of those confidential conversations, correct?
No, I'm not. Okay. If it's confidential, then I wouldn't be a party to it.
Okay. Are you aware that the Sites Project Authority has asked the Calusa tribe for specific evidence of the tribe's relationships with and obligations to unique and essential plant gathering areas?
I have heard some of the testimony of your witnesses about that, but I'm not specifically aware of anything you have directly asked them other than what your witnesses have testified to.
Thank you. Are you aware of whether the Calusa tribe has provided any evidence of these features that we just discussed that is more specific than the statements in Chairman Mitchum's testimony?
I'm not aware of that, and I believe that Chairman Mitchum's testimony, and I can't speak to it because I cannot speak for Calusa or Chairman Mitchum, but I believe in his testimony, which is in FOR 8, that he's pretty specific about the information that he has conveyed or the tribe has conveyed to Sites Authority.
So at page 11 on lines 12 through 16, Just a second. Yes, excuse me. So on lines 12 through 16, you suggest that if sites had, quote, done consultation, it would have known about possible burial sites, sacred sites, or cultural gathering sites in the project area, correct?
That's what I stated, yes. That is in response or that is a result of the settlement hearing that you were present at, that Ms. Forsyth was present at, that Mr. Conrad was present at, and I asked some specific questions of Sites Authority. One being, were you aware of any burial sites? And the answer was that they said they had not. I asked Sites Authority if you were aware of any sacred sites or cultural gathering sites in the project area. Sites Authority said they were not. I did ask if you had done any tribal AB 52 consultation with possible affected tribes. You said that you had, but did not provide a list or names of contact information of those tribes.
Well, your testimony here in paragraph 35 suggests that the sites project did not do any consultation, correct?
I don't believe it does suggest that.
Well, if we look, for example, at line 13 on page 11, the bracketed language says, which they would have if they had done consultation.
Yeah.
What did you
Followed
mean
by
by
they
that?
said they had not. So yes, I'm inferring that that particular amount of consultation or confidentiality, or however you want to classify it, that information would have been available to the Sites Authority about where possible burial sites were, where possible sacred sites or cultural gathering sites were, if they had done consultation or done meaningful consultation. In each of those questions that I posed to the Sites Authority on that hearing, you replied they had not. They were not aware of those things that I asked about.
So you said you were familiar with the testimony provided by authority witnesses in this proceeding regarding tribal consultation, correct?
Yes, I listened to the whole tribal panel.
Okay. Well, in light of what you heard on that tribal panel, do you still agree with your statement that, or your suggestion that the sites project did not do any consultation?
Well, let me qualify it then. By what I heard on the tribal panel and by the responses to my question in the pre-settlement hearing, that sites said they were not aware of burial sites, sacred sites, or cultural gathering sites, then I would qualify it to mean meaningful consultation then. And under AB 52, the statute talks about consultation being meaningful consultation. And unfortunately, the way people refer to consultation with tribes now is just the word consultation. So I might have been guilty of that in this phrase also, and I should have probably put meaningful consultation.
Okay.
Did that answer your question?
Yes. So in your opinion, does meaningful consultation require the tribes, to the extent that they can, provide information to the requesting agency regarding potential impacts?
Yes, I'll agree with that.
So in your opinion, it's kind of a two-way street, right?
Yes, it is.
Okay. I'd like to turn to page 13, in paragraph 44. So in paragraph 34, you state that the site's reservoir will not help the Winnemem to achieve its goal of ecological and cultural restoration by renewing fishing opportunities because Sacramento River diversions will have certain effects, correct?
I don't exactly see what you're saying or what you're reading. And if we're going to talk about paragraph 44, will Sites Reservoir help us meet those goals? That's going to have to include the testimony about Baird's fishery, the history about us trying to reintroduce salmon in the McCloud River. Those are part of the goals I'm speaking of here. Those salmon being released back into the Sacramento River, the possible entrainment and entrapment by intakes at Sites Reservoir, the diversion of water from the Sacramento River, which will impact migrating salmon. So yes, will Sites Reservoir help us meet those goals? No, if diversions are done.
So from paragraph 44, line 23, is it your opinion that sites diversions from the Sacramento River will lead to entrapment of juvenile fish at water intakes?
Yes, it is.
What is the basis of that opinion?
Well, the basis of that opinion would probably be about 30 years worth of experience working in water policy and water diversions in the state of California. And what happens at intake processes, whether it's at the pumping stations down south, other diversion areas where there's screens to try and divert water off the Sacramento River. That's why you have applied for an incidental take permit. Is that correct? Because the incidental take permit will allow you to take salmon incidentally by entrapment into those water intakes. Is that correct?
So are you aware that the sites diversions will occur through screen diversion facilities?
I'm aware of that. And I'm also aware that the size of juvenile salmon, fry, or smolts, or however you want to describe them, headed down the Sacramento River, aren't strong enough to get away from a flow into an intake. They don't have the ability or the strength to get past that. So if there's a diversion coming of water down, I don't know how many CFS you are going to pull off at one time from the Sacramento River, but you have the great possibility of entrapping juveniles against those screens and therefore pinning them there.
Are you familiar with the performance requirements of the screens that sites will divert through from a regulatory perspective?
From a regulatory perspective, no.
Okay. Are you aware that sites is projecting a very small change in temperatures in the Sacramento River due to its releases?
Well, I'm aware that you're projecting. I don't believe the projection, and I don't believe the calculations. And I also don't believe that there's the water available for appropriation.
Have you done any independent analysis that would indicate the authority's temperature analyses are unreliable?
Any personal analysis?
Sure.
No personal analysis. Just observation of temperatures coming from dams at different times of the year.
So on page 14 at line 3, on lines 2 and 3, excuse me, it states that you have to review, you state that you have to view the CVP and SWP as a whole and not just piecemeal project by project, correct?
Correct.
Are you aware that the sites project is is and will not be part of the Central Valley project?
I'm aware of that. I'm also aware that it was originally a DWR project to be part of the SWP. But either way, it is another piece of infrastructure that will fit into the hydrology of the Sacramento River. And therefore, you must look at the whole system, the system as a whole and not as a piece.
Is this sites project going to be part of the State Water project?
Not now, no. It's going to be a private reservoir built specifically for financial gain.
So finally, on page 15, at lines 5 through 7, you state that the construction and success of the proposed site's reservoir is dependent on the enlargement of Shasta Dam, and that the success of the DCP is dependent on the construction of Sites Dam, correct?
Yes, I do.
Are you aware that the modeling for the sites project does not include enlargement of Shasta Dam?
I'm aware that the modeling of Sites Reservoir does not include the enlargement of Shasta Dam, but I also am aware that the modeling of Sites Reservoir includes water exchanges from Shasta Dam and involves the cold water pool in Shasta Dam and releases from the Bureau of Reclamation.
Well, with respect to those exchanges, the authorities articulated those as a benefit for fish, correct?
Well, the authority might have articulated those as a benefit for fish. Because it's been articulated doesn't necessarily mean they are a benefit for fish.
Well, they've offered analyses that would to support that articulation, correct?
They have offered some analyses, and that analysis will be challenged at further testimony in this hearing.
So are you aware that the modeling for the sites project does not include construction of the DCP?
No, I'm not, but that's not what I say in this sentence here, that the success of the DCP is dependent on the construction of Sites Dam. And it basically is, because it's another water diversion.
So are you aware of whether the sites project is contemplated as part of the Delta Conveyance project?
I don't believe it is, but as I said earlier in my testimony that we didn't go over, you have to look at the water system as a whole, all the way from the Trinity River to Shasta Dam, Keswick, all the way down to the Delta and the tunnels and the the California Canal, Delta Mandado Canal District. It's all one whole piece of a whole system that has been engineered to change, move water in and out of the system, around the system and down the system. Whether you call it Sites Reservoir, whether you call it Red Bluff Diversion Dam, whether you call it Keswick Dam, whether you call it the forebay down there, it's all part of the same system. And each piece looks to the other piece to see what's available and what they'll be able to do to supplement or support the other piece of the hydrology. It's not rocket science to look at it.
But your testimony there on line 7 is that the DCP is dependent on the construction of Sites Dam, correct?
Yes.
So if Sites Dam were not built, could the DCP be built and still operate?
It could be, but I believe the DCP is not going to be built.
Okay, thank you. Just finally, are the Winnemem Wintu a federally recognized tribe?
What's the relevance?
I'm asking you the question.
Yeah, what's the relevance of the question?
I'm going to take it as an objection based on relevance, but I am going to overrule it. My understanding is that there are claims with respect to federally reserved water rights, and there may be a connection here. So I think it's an appropriate question, Mr. Mulcahy.
Okay. The Winnemem-Wintu are not a federally listed tribe, if that is what you're asking. However, we are recognized by the state of California as a historic California Native American tribe. And with that, we enjoy certain recognition and certain privileges within the state of California because of that.
Thank you. I have no more questions.
Thank you, Mr. Ferguson. Thank you, Mr. Mulcahy. We are at 4:32. At this time, I think what I'd like to do is turn to, and I'll go to each of you one by one, but I'll ask Mr. Soderlin from the Department of Water Resources, do you have any questions for these witnesses?
No, I do not. Thank you.
And then Ms. Auftenberg, do you have any questions on behalf of the Bureau of Reclamation?
I do not. Thank you.
And then I'm scrolling down my list. Ms. Mendel-Rice, there you are. Do you have any questions on behalf of state water contractors?
We do not. Thank you.
Thank you. Based on this, I would consider those to be the relevant parties with respect to cross-examination questions. I will look back to Ms. Willie. I realize, well, I believe we wrapped up. So Ms. Willie, do you have redirect for these witnesses? I realize we don't have all of them with us, but will you have redirect for these witnesses?
Yes, I do. If Vice Chair Tayaba is available, I do have some questions for her, and would have some for Mr. Marston when he's able to rejoin us potentially on Wednesday.
So I think what we should do is Ms. Willie, I will turn to you to organize, if you would please, on Wednesday morning, we could turn immediately if, assuming the witnesses are available, if Vice Chair Tayaba can be there, and as well as Mr. Marston to complete redirect. And then if there's any recross, we would finish that first thing in the morning. And then we could move on to Mr. Schutz. Do I have Mr. Schutz as our next witness? Is that correct?
I believe it'll be Mr. Stork.
Mr. Stork, I'm sorry. I had the wrong order. We do
Ms.
have a little.
Kinsey, I
Yes.
still had a few questions for Ms. Norris, and my understanding is she was going to be back on
Okay.
too, right?
I think I misunderstood. I either misunderstood or it's been a long day. Thank you.
And Miss Norris is asking around what time she is expected back. Would that be first thing on Wednesday?
Well, that's what I'm trying to coordinate. We can make it first thing on Wednesday, if that is a acceptable time to have Ms. Norris, Mr. Marson, and Vice Chair Tayaba. If we can gather all of those first thing on Wednesday morning, we could turn to that first.
I apologize for jumping in, but I thought I heard Miss Norris say that between 10 and 2 she was available.
Okay. I am going to look to the coordinating NGO parties and Ms. Willie, if in particular, if you would please coordinate the witnesses to return on Wednesday. I'll ask for your patience, Mr. Ferguson, to be prepared with the rest of your questions for Ms. Norris. And then we can get through redirect and recross, and then we can excuse the witnesses and they can proceed with their lives. Otherwise, let me know what will work. It's difficult for me to coordinate this from here without knowing what is happening. Mr. Mulcahy, you have a hand up, please.
Thank you. How soon will the written objections be submitted, and are we going to be able to see them, and at what point will we be able to challenge the objection?
I will set a time. I need a little bit of time to think. That's a good question. I need a little bit of time to think about it. My intent would be to deal with all the evidentiary objections when we deal with moving the exhibits into evidence. That would include objections to testimony as well as any other objections to the exhibits, and that we would do that after the close of case in chief from all of the parties. So that would be at the end. I don't know if we'll have time when we get to it. It kind of depends how this proceeds. But when we complete case in chief for everyone, I think that means we will want to have. There's a couple of options. So let's not decide today, but I'll put it out there. One is we schedule a procedural hearing day after November 4th. And we just decide we're going to set a deadline for writing down. I don't want extensive briefing on the evidentiary objections, but it is helpful to write down what the objections are so that the other parties can respond or be aware of what they are. And so we could set a deadline then sometime after November 4th and plan to reconvene. The other thing, though, is that I'm thinking out loud. The rebuttal deadline for exhibits is, I believe, December 6th, which will come up pretty quickly. And I know all of you will want to know what evidence is in or out before you submit your rebuttal. So I will. What I'm thinking now is that we would set a deadline later in October. For submission of evidentiary objections, we do kind of need to, and once again, sorry, this is train of thought. We do probably need to get through the testimony itself before you're going to be able to identify all of the objections and write them down. I mean, I think that makes sense. So maybe it is that we have to set a deadline very shortly thereafter, after we've heard all of the case in chief, have those written, submit those objections in writing, and then we could convene a day to deal with all of that. Mr. Mooney, I see a hand. If you have suggestions, it's more than welcome after my rambling thought. Thank you.
I had one more question.
And Mr. McKay, I'll get back to you too. Thank you for starting this. It's a good thought process for us to have. Mr. Mooney.
A couple thoughts and a comment or a question. One thought was, I know you had rebuttal testimony set for December 6th, and that was with a January 9th start date. Now that that's been kind of moved about 10 days or 2 weeks or so, you may consider moving the rebuttal date, and that might give some more, the date for rebuttal testimony, and that would give some more time for rulings on the objections to the evidence. And then you did ask Mr. Ferguson if he would provide since he made the kind of the oral objection today, and quite frankly, I didn't get all the paragraphs or all the bases for the objections, and you indicated asked him to do that. I was wondering if that was a request to be done prior to the thing or prior to the deadline, or if that was something we could all get from him in the next, day or so, just so we have that, since he made the oral objection already, just so we have clarification on that.
Thank you, Mr. Mooney. I will turn to you, and I'm now forgetting you, Mr. Mulcahy, but turn to you, Mr. Ferguson, just in terms of writing down the oral objection that it can be in an email, it can be informal. Would you be willing to, if you would please share that in the next, by the end of the day on Wednesday? And this is not, it doesn't need to be exact, you're not waiving any rights, but just writing down basically what you said. That would be helpful.
We'll do it by tomorrow.
Thank you. And then noted, Mr. Mooney, on the December 6th date. I need some time to think about that. Let me turn back to Mr. Mulcahy. I didn't answer your question, but we got started on finding an answer. And what is your next?
That was good. My only other question was, do you want all of this panel back Wednesday? If cross-examination is done for myself, nobody else has any more questions for me, because I do have to work. I took today off.
And I appreciate that many of you may have other obligations. I'll ask Ms. Willie, do you have any redirect for, I think it depends. If you don't have redirect for Mr. Mulcahy, we can excuse him.
I will let you know. I'm going to re-go through my notes again. I might have like 1 or 2 questions for you. If you could come back like at the very beginning, just for like 10 minutes. But
okay.
But I'll talk to you. I'll talk to you offline about it. We might not need you.
All right. I
Thank you.
appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you, Officer Kinsey.
Thank you. We're at 4:42. What else Ms. Dorman, please?
Well, I just want to confirm who is needed back on Wednesday morning. So right now I am understanding that it is Ms. Sherry Norris, Lester Marsden, and Melissa Tayaba. And Casil will coordinate with Gary. He is a maybe. Do I have that right?
Ms. Norris definitely needs to come back because Mr. Ferguson has additional questions, and then the remainder is really up to Ms. Willie and whether she has redirect questions for the witnesses.
Okay, thank you.
That's, yeah, I'm fine.
That's
I don't
right,
have
Jen.
additional, I guess I should clarify, I don't have additional questions. So it really, if there's no redirect, then I will from afar thank the witnesses for their testimony. But that's really up to, you can coordinate, Ms. Willie, about who you need there. Are there other procedural issues we should address? My intent would be Ms. Dorman, please.
Well, my next question is we got an estimate for time for cross-examination of Mr. Stork, Mr. Schutz, and Ms. Christina Swanson, and I would just like to ask if that does that still stand? Is there any change? Because as you can see, coordinating witnesses to show up is a mighty effort.
See that. I will look to, I don't know if you recall what your guesstimates were, Mr. Ferguson, but
I don't, but they haven't changed.
okay.
Roughly an hour each.
Okay.
Sounds like they haven't changed.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there other issues we should address? So my intent would be we'd start with, depending on coordination of timing, we either would start with Mr. Stork, and then we may need to take a break with cross-examination if we need to in terms of timing of the other witnesses, and then return to Mr. Stork. I think we can be flexible that way. And then we would move through the order that that coordinating parties had previously indicated for witnesses. Are there any other questions before we break and adjourn for today and reconvene on October 2nd? Well, thank you once again for all your efforts, and I will see you at 9 a.m. on Wednesday morning. Thank you. We're adjourned.